All right, welcome to the December meeting of the Arlington County Planning Commission. This is our first of 3 meetings this month. Tonight, we are going to be hearing all the items related to the Metropolitan Park site plan phases 6, 7, and 8. On Wednesday of this week, we'll be hearing crystal houses and also doing our commission business. And on Thursday of this week, we'll be hearing 2 items. One is the zoning ordinance amendments for elder care, and we're also going to be hearing the RTA for the reprint of the general land use plan. So if you're here for any of those other items, please come back and join us later this week. As always, for folks who are interested in testifying on our item this evening, you have to turn in a speaker slip to our clerk, Ms. Johnson, before she calls the item, which she'll do shortly. Also want to remind commissioners and people who are going to be speaking to remove their cell phones from the dais or the table, as they do interfere with the microphones. And so with that, Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Our first item for the evening, number 1, A, B, C, and D, is the Metropolitan Park, phases 6, 7, and 8. 1A is the MTP, Master Transportation Plan. 1B is the PDSP, number 105. 1C is Site Plan 105-9, and D is also Site Plan 105-9. We have Peter Schultz, our planning staff, to present this item this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These 4 applications that you're considering today were made by JBG Smith on behalf of Amazon, who are going to be purchasing the site. These are Master Transportation Plan amendments, a phased development site plan amendment to the Pentagon City PDSP, a site plan amendment to actually permit construction of the buildings, and then site plan amendments for phases 1 through 3 of Met Park, which is a cleanup of a previous condition. Just to refamiliarize everybody with the site, the Pentagon City phased development site plan area is the large area in pink, with the Pentagon Center area excluded from it and the dotted blue line. The Met Park location is on the easternmost edge of Pentagon City, and you can see here how the most recent phases have been built out. The existing conditions, we are talking about the last 3 phases of the segment known as Metropolitan Park, phases 6 and 7 through 7 and 8. Just for guiding documents, this is for the Pentagon City PDSP area is largely zone CO 2.5. The GLUP designation is largely 3/4 high medium residential, 1/4 medium office apartment hotel. The PDSP that was adopted by the county board in 1976 had planning goals and objectives. I will not read all of these through, but it is very items like a desirable mix of uses, highest densities close to transit and metro rail, building heights should be varied. Pentagon City evolved over time from its original approval in 1976 for a community that was mixed use, had retail, residential, and office development. Due to market forces over the intervening, especially the first 2 decades of the history of Pentagon City, much of residential density was actually transferred from parcel to parcel, with the result that the Metropolitan Park parcel ended up with almost 3,000 dwelling units, the majority of the dwelling units allocated to Pentagon City. The first couple decades favored office and retail development, and to accommodate that, density was shifted by various actions of the county board around the site. So in 2003, when we now call Metropolitan Park, what was then Parcel 3 of the Pentagon City PDSP was developed, principles were developed. At this time, it was assumed that the development would be all residential. However, the overarching guiding principles in the Metropolitan Park design guidelines can apply easily to either office use as residential. It had guidance on height, massing, building architecture, transportation, including a new grid of streets to break up the superblock, and new public open space. The design guidelines gave more detailed guidance on how building heights could accomplish the goal of the original Pentagon City PDSP to have the highest densities more towards Crystal City to the north and east of the Pentagon City tract. The Metropolitan Park Design Guidelines assumed up to three 22-story residential buildings located at the easternmost end of the site along Eade Street. One of those three buildings has been constructed. That is the Bartlett, the building that has the Whole Foods in the ground floor. The PDSP, one of the applications, the applicant is requesting a change to change two of those 22-story residential buildings to two 22-story office buildings, with the same result that three 22-story office buildings clustered towards the middle of the site, towards the easternmost end of the Pentagon City tract and the easternmost end of this Metropolitan Park tract. The design guidelines also had guidance on massing. Building heights vary to break up the skyline, again fulfilling the goals of the original 1976 plan. Buildings tapering down to lower density development along 15th Street. Building base would have at least, if not retail, at least active entrances and residential entrances. So what are the applications to advance the proposed development here? The first is the proposed master transportation plan amendment to remove a segment of 14th Road South, a dead-end segment east of South Elm Street. This was not new. This was actually a previous MTP amendment for Metropolitan Park was done to facilitate the construction of Met Park 4 and 5. What it took was a dead-end street here. Again, not impacting the planned network and porosity of the development, but to just facilitate the floor plate that, for instance, the Whole Foods required. In this case, the applicant is requesting that, again, a dead-end segment of public street be removed from the master transportation plan. However, all other streets which connect to each other will be constructed with this application. Then there are three segments to the proposed phased development site plan. They concern use, a change of the use, a change of the height, and a change of the density. As I showed previously, while the Metropolitan Park parcel of Pentagon City was anticipated to be entirely residential, which was merely an artifact of the county board shifting all of the residential density to that site, and this parcel being one of the last to develop. In this case, phases 6 through 8, the applicant is requesting that they be changed to retail, office development with ground floor retail. A change to the PDSP to allow two office buildings of heights of 22 stories in the place of two residential buildings with 22 stories. And then finally, density to convert the unused density that's been allocated to Metropolitan Park, about 1,800 units, to office gross floor area, and then also incorporate additional density that the applicant needs to earn. So those are the three facets of the phased development site plan request. To demonstrate the applicant has followed the guidance of the phase proposed height and massing. They have clustered the heights on the easternmost side of the site. They have varied the roof lines within the parameters of the square footage that they are accomplishing with varied roof lines. And as the applicant will show you in more detail later, stepping down to the public open space that's proposed and to 15th Street where there's lower height development along that stretch of street. The design guidelines ground level plan anticipated about 100,000 square feet of retail. The applicant will be adding additional retail to this site, thereby lining both Fern Street and Eade Street with retail or retail equivalent. The proposed conditions of approval in accordance with the county's retail plan will permit either retail or retail equivalent. pushing outwards what had previously been an inwards-looking block. As you can also see the segments of open space that are proposed, which we'll go into greater detail later. What had been a small open space private inside the planned phase 7 and 8 is instead turned outward to add additional open space to the last segments of open space the applicant is required to do by the Metropolitan Park phasing plan. The proposed architecture responds to the guidelines. The guidelines did say that varied architecture is encouraged for the Metropolitan Park block, and the applicant actually does nod to the existing buildings with the use of cast stone and brick, and the prominent use of color to break up the larger areas of glass on the facades of the building. At the ground level, things are more or less the same as they would have been had these been residential buildings. The ground floors incorporate canopies and shy zones as recommended by the design guidelines, and major building entrances are facing the proposed public open space, as we see on the right side photo. The proposed public open space, the applicant is constructing and providing an easement for the last required segment of open space. Throughout the development and build-out of Metropolitan Park, the streets and public open spaces have been provided in phases according to the plant design guidelines. The applicant, however, is also, in addition, with a 5,400 square foot public open space that will be granted an easement to the county with the Met Park 6 building, and an approximately 13,000 square foot open space that will be delivered with the Met Park 7 and 8 building. And these open spaces will be contiguous, thereby expanding the planned open space to over 2 acres for this entire Metropolitan Park site. All of the area will be subject to a master planning process and constructed and maintained by the applicant pending agreements with the other property owners in Met Park 3, Met Parks 1 through 3. And this gives you an idea of the extent of the master planning process that will take place. The pink line, the applicant will show you further. The dark green are the additional areas of open space that the applicant is providing with this application. The light green are the existing ones. Also note, along Eade Street, the continuation of the linear park concept, which was established with the Met Park 4-5, the Bartlett building, to take advantage of the extra wide sidewalk width of Eade Street due to the large storm sewer pipe underneath. Enhanced landscaping, and the applicant will show you, will be provided along Eade Street, but that won't be subject to the park planning process. The applicant is requesting several modifications of zoning regulations, additional density of 585,000 square feet, a parking modification of 1 parking space to 1,100 square feet of gross floor area, modification of the penthouse height to 29.5 feet, and that's in order to adequately cover the elevator overruns and the mechanical equipment on the site, and then exclusions from gross floor area for below-grade storage, air shafts, and areas open to below, mezzanine areas that could also be considered atrium areas. The exclusions are typical of those granted in most site plans, as they do not add to the height and bulk of the building. The final application before you to facilitate this development is minor site plan amendment to phases 1 through 3. There was a site plan condition that required phases 1 through 3 to dedicate in fee simple to the county street segments that actually have public garage, parking garage, I should say, underneath them. Instead, we wish to have only those segments of streets that are free and clear of that encumbrance. Mitigation for this proposed site plan. I won't go through all of these, and in fact, the site plan mitigation on the left is not all-inclusive. New traffic lights, protected bike lanes around the site, the new public open space that's required of the applicant, they will grant the easements, they will construct, they will maintain. base AHIF contribution of $7.5 million, $225,000 for public art, $75,000 per phase. And then, of course, constructing the new streets, the usual streetscape per all of our adopted plans, utility undergrounding, in-building wireless emergency communication system. The mitigation that is associated with the request for additional density beyond that already is allocated to the site. The applicant is committing to achieve a LEED Platinum certification with Arlington priority credits, a $12.5 million AHIF contribution, combining the two AHIF contributions, the mandatory and the additional density, that's at $20 million. A public use of the conference space on the second floor, off-site transportation improvements, including additional stretches of protected bike lane, and a $14 million contribution for constructing and maintaining, which they will, pending agreements with the owners of the other phases of Met Park, to construct and maintain a brand new public open space following the public space planning process that the county will lead. There has been a lot of public engagement with this process. Unlike many site plans, it started with a broad community meeting in early July, where the chairman of the county board and the chairman of the planning commission attended to first provide information about the basics of the review process of a building site plan, and then broken up into stations where representatives from the county and the applicant could answer questions from the public about various aspects of the proposed site plans. Then was followed by committee meetings of the Planning Commission. First, the Long Range Planning Committee, then 3 Site Plan Review Committee meetings. Once the Site Plan Review Committee meetings concluded, commission meetings began. The Energy and Energy Conservation Commission, the Disability Advisory Commission, the Parks and Recreation Commission, the Transportation Commission, most recently, and of course tonight, the Planning Commission. On Thursday, the Citizens Advisory Commission on Housing will be reviewing the affordable housing package, and then, of course, the county board, most likely December 14th. All of these applications advance those principles, those overarching principles that were adopted of the Pentagon City PDSP dating back to 1976, the overarching principles of the Metropolitan Park Design Guidelines with the applicant's proposed changes, for instance, to the open space, turning the private open space public and removing the segment of street. The additional density that the applicant is requesting above what is allocated to is appropriately mitigated. The building massing was carefully designed. And all of the mitigation staff would like to reiterate is based on adopted policies of the county board, the master transportation plan, the public spaces master plan, and the affordable housing master plan. The proposed zoning modifications are appropriate for the site, and in the cases of the air shafts, result in better design of the building. Therefore, staff does recommend approval of the items A through D before you. Thank you. I would also like to say I have Joanne Gabor from DES Transportation with me and Marco Rivero from the Department of Parks and Recreation.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. There's a heavy hitters from staff behind you, so we appreciate everybody here this evening. Now I'd like to turn to the applicant for their presentation.
Good evening. I'm excited to be here tonight on behalf of Amazon to present our vision for our new Arlington headquarters. And I'm glad to see many familiar faces from our site plan review meetings. My name is John Shuttler. I am Vice President of Global Real Estate and Facilities. You know, it's been a remarkable year as we've opened our first offices and began hiring our employees in our second headquarters here in Arlington. We're also excited to break ground on our first phase of HQ2 development, and we look forward to discussing our plans with you this evening. Tonight, we will share an overview of the proposed Met Park project. At the table with me are Brian Earl, our lead architect with ZGF, Nan Walsh, our land use counsel with Walsh Colucci, and Brian Stout, Amazon Senior Manager for U.S. Public Policy. Behind me is our team of consultants, including our civil engineer, transportation, landscape architect, as well as representatives from JBG Smith and the Seneca Group, our development partners. In addition to the long-range planning and site plan review meetings, we have presented at numerous county commissions, including Transportation, E2C2, the Disability Advisory Commission, and the Parks and Recreation Commission. We will be presenting to the Housing Commission later this week. We've appreciated the opportunity to engage with a wide range of community stakeholders and value all the time citizen volunteers have committed to the review and betterment of our project. We started our design process by studying the existing planning on the site and Arlington's overarching planning principles. From the beginning, we found strong alignment with our own values, and we created a set of precepts that we gave to the design team to use as guideposts and inspiration for our design. These precepts have informed our design, and some key areas of alignment we'll share include plans to complete Met Park and expand on it, with an increase in new public open space, connecting the street grid, tapering building heights, adding on-site daycare, adding varied ground floor retail, consolidating and minimizing locations for loading and parking, offering facilities for bikes and other non-vehicular modes of transportation, and pursuing highly sustainable design practices. Earlier this year, we began hiring and opened our first office in Crystal City. This slide shows the 3 phases of development for our headquarters in Arlington. Phase 1 entails our occupancy of 580,000 square feet of renovated office space in Crystal City. Met Park and Penn Place, consisting of approximately 4.2 million square feet, will comprise phases 2 and 3 of our headquarters. For us, the ability to have a concentrated location that can accommodate our 25,000 employees in an easily walkable environment is of critical importance. Being new construction, these 2 phases present new opportunities to create a unique and special place that will integrate with the surrounding community. Now I'll turn it over to Brian Earl to give you an overview of the site project, design, and sustainability features. Thank you.
John, thank you for that introduction. First, we'll start with an overview of Metropolitan Park, which was originally planned in the early 2000s as a mixed-use, transit-oriented development. It sits at a critical juncture between Pentagon City on the west and Crystal City in the east, and when complete, will serve as an important link that stitches these 2 neighborhoods together. As staff has noted, it was envisioned as a development of 8 buildings of varying heights around a central green, with the highest densities to the east, culminating in 3 22-story towers. Over the 15 years since, 5 of these 8 phases have been completed, and we're here today to present the final 3 phases, phases 6, 7, and 8. Today, the site is occupied by a 1-story warehouse and surface parking and is over 90% impervious. By removing the existing warehouses, that allows us to complete the extensions of 14th Street and Elm Street through the site, and this allows us to break down the existing superblock into 2 pedestrian-scaled blocks of between 200 and 300 feet in length. If we take the setbacks prescribed in the design guidelines and extrude them upwards to 22 stories, we can see the maximum development envelope. From there, we began to carve back. The first move we made was to push the towers away from the park, as well as the residential buildings to the south. And by introducing a series of vertical steps, we further tapered that massing and established height relationships between our buildings and the neighboring buildings around it, as well as enhanced the visual porosity through the site. Lastly, along the street edges, we've pushed and pulled the mass, breaking down the scale consistent with the neighborhood and introducing a rhythm to the street wall. This approach is well aligned with the original vision of Metropolitan Park. The massing maintains and enhances view sheds and sunlight to the park within. The massing is tapered to the south as called for. Furthermore, the towers have been realigned to frame the park as was originally envisioned. The image on the left shows the original master plan, the one in the middle, the design is when we started this, and finally on the right, the proposed. Lastly, we've introduced 2 new plazas on the southwest corner of the park that further expand and create a diversity among the open spaces of the central green. These plazas frame what is a new entrance to the park along 14th Street from the east, furthering that connectivity to Crystal City. This is a ground floor plan. I've rotated it for you. So the Bartlett and North is to your right. Our buildings, Met 6 is in the middle at the bottom and Met 7, 8 on the left. The ground floor has been laid out to enhance the pedestrian experience. We've pushed the service functions in the loading docks to the edges, opposite of existing loading docks of the Gramercy and the Bartlett. This has freed up the remainder of the ground floor for active uses. We've located the building lobbies, bike entrances, and a daycare along the edge of the park to enhance activity during the day, while the bulk of the lobby functions have been pushed up to the second floor. This helps minimize the size of the lobby on the ground floor and frees up the majority of it for uninterrupted active retail. In fact, that retail extends uninterrupted the entire length of both 15th Street and Eads. At over 69,000 square feet is more than 3 times what was called for in the design guidelines. Amazon views vibrant street-level retail as an amenity to their employees and neighbors and as a way to connect to the community. They prioritize partnering with local retail tenants that fit well within the neighborhood and work hard to have their retail open on day 1 of occupancy. They plan to offer a range of options, including restaurants, entertainment, childcare, and specialty services, like those shown here, both for those people who work in the buildings as well as to the people who live in the community. The project will make significant improvements to the open space network in the neighborhood, including an additional half acre of open space and a continuation of the linear park along Eads, along the bottom of your screen here. In addition, an acre of open space on the interior of the block in the form of a park extension and 2 plazas. Connecting those 3 spaces is 14th and East Elm Streets, which we have proposed with flush curbs and special paving to create a seamless pedestrian experience. In addition, as staff has noted, we will be working to redevelop and redesign the existing park space. Everything you see here in pink is part of a planning effort that will begin next year, where we will engage in a series of workshops with local community organizations, neighbors, and county staff. To lead that process, we have engaged James Corner Field Operations. You may know them from their work on the High Line in New York, and we're really excited to begin that process. Amazon is committed to supporting well-programmed and well-used public open space, including events like farmers markets, food trucks, and outdoor movies, along with much more. 2 elements that we've heard repeatedly through the engagement process as important to the community on this site are a playground and a dog park, and we are very supportive of both. The image on the top left of this is an image of the Day One Plaza, Seattle's Amazon's campus in Seattle, where outdoor retail seating, a dog park, and overhead weather protection combine to create an inviting pedestrian experience. All of this will be set in a rich landscape of native plants, and when completed, represents over 2 acres of new renovated open space for the community. In addition to the abundance of ground floor open space, the roofs of the buildings will include over an acre of landscape green roof, providing an outdoor space for Amazon's employees, as well as an inviting view for neighboring buildings. Of this area, at least 55% of it will be landscaped with native plantings, and the remainder will be hardscape areas for occupants to use. The project includes a number of transportation improvements, including 2 new roads, expanded sidewalks with street trees on 4 additional streets, 3 traffic signals with timing adjustments to several more, and enhancements to 3 existing bus stops. Of particular interest during the SPRC process was the bicycle infrastructure proposed. In addition to providing large at-grade bike rooms for employees, we will be constructing over a half mile of upgraded bike lanes along Eads and 15th Streets. On Eads, they will extend the length of Metropolitan Park from 12th to 15th Streets, and when combined with improvements on the related Crystal Houses project, which you will hear on Wednesday, will run uninterrupted all the way down to 23rd Street to the south. Along 15th, they will extend from Elm Street to the west, all the way to Route 1 to the east, where planned county improvements will eventually extend this bike lane to Crystal Drive. Another important element of these bike lanes is that rather than the typical flexi posts that you're accustomed to seeing on county lanes, these will be fully protected with a curb that separates them from the parking lane. And the intersections of 13th, 14th, and 15th and Eads will be designed with protected intersections according to NACTO's newest standards. As a local bike commuter, I see this as an incredible improvement and a great example for the broader bike network. In order to minimize commuting by single occupancy vehicles and encourage the use of transit, Amazon has proposed a robust transportation demand management program. As part of this program, Amazon employees will receive monthly commuter benefits to allow them to take advantage of the area's public transportation system. These benefits are intended to cover 100% of the average transit commuting costs within the region. Amazon also encourages carpooling through its van pool program. Benefits include free parking and reserved parking spaces located at convenient locations within the garage. Employees and visitors will be charged for parking. This time we don't know exactly how much, but Amazon sets parking rates such that employees who drive alone to work will pay the highest out-of-pocket commuting costs. And while employees will likely pay for parking on a monthly basis, Amazon uses tracking to reimburse employees for each day that they do not drive to encourage alternative modes of transportation. When we shared our construction logistics plans at the last SPRC in October, there were still quite a few details to be worked out. Since then, we have been working diligently with county staff to refine those plans in order to minimize the impact to the community as much as possible. With that goal in mind, we want to keep as much of the construction activity inside the fence of this site as possible. This includes both the building construction itself, as well as laydown and staging areas, and places for loading and unloading. We've proposed 2 staging areas for this project, one on the northwest corner of the Met Park site, on the western edge of the park, will be inside the initial fence, as well as additional staging areas on the Penn Place parcel. We also want to make sure that construction traffic enters and exits this neighborhood as quickly as possible along the shortest possible route and stays off local streets. In this case, trucks will predominantly enter the site from the north off of Interstate 395 and proceed south on each street and then pull into the site on the northern end. To ensure that we don't have trucks idling out in the street, we are preserving within the fence line of the project a lane for construction staging so that they can pull easily in and stage inside the site. When leaving, trucks will exit from the south edge of the site, take a left onto 15th Street, and then take the ramp onto Route 1 and head south out of the neighborhood. Core construction hours for the project will be consistent with standard site plan conditions. We are discussing with staff the potential for extended hours for some specific activities for reasons of public safety and to reduce the impact on the neighborhood. And with that overview, I want to walk you around the site so you can appreciate the architecture and get a sense of what it will feel like from the street. So this is the southwest corner of the site at 15th and Eads, that critical juncture where Crystal City meets Pentagon City. You can see how the building's massing steps down to 15th Street and also pushes back to highlight entrances for the park on 14th Street. The base of the building is a rich terracotta cradle, and inserted into that is a glassy element, a more exuberant glassy tower expression that will identify the projects in the skyline. The tower is clad in a series of colored fins that respond to the building's solar exposure and also shade the facade. In addition, all of the upper floors of the building will have operable windows to allow for individual control of users in the buildings as well as foster that connection to the outside. This architecture was really well received during the SPRCs. We heard repeated comments on excitement about the use of color and how that was building on many things that were already occurring in Crystal City. Now zooming into the street level, I'm going to move to the southwest corner. You can see the generous taper of the buildings. Make towards 15th Street, they step down from 22 to 14 to 3 stories. At 50 feet tall, that 3-story expression is the same height as the residential buildings across the street. In the foreground here, you can see a large element. In the foreground is a 700-person event space that looks out over the street. Amazon has a similar meeting center in Seattle, which is used outside of business hours for a wide range of community events. They're committed to providing similar opportunities for community groups here at Met Park. And then below and along 15th Street below the meeting center is that continuous ground floor retail or retail equivalents. This is a close-up view. As we move back towards that stitching corner, you can see the richness of the terracotta accented with elements of copper as well as warm wood elements. Moving down 15th Street, you'll be presented with a vibrant and generous pedestrian experience. This is that linear park that we noted earlier. The buildings are set back 34 feet from the street edge with a wide 12-foot clear sidewalk. On the left will be a rich mix of retailers. On the right are a series of outdoor landscape rooms with cafe seating, rich native plantings and shade structures to complement the retail and provide a buffer to the bike lane on the right. This is a view as you move north, coming to that entrance on 14th Street. The buildings step back to allow light and air and welcome people into the park. In addition, in the foreground, you can see the buffered cycle track that runs down each street and connects to the greater network. As we move in on 14th Street, we'll stop and take a look back here at the 2 entrances, the main lobbies, which flank 14th Street and frame the edge of the park with a set of deep overhangs that create a shady porch to enjoy the outdoors on days that are considerably warmer than today. And lastly, this is a view from the southern edge of the plaza on 7-8, looking north towards the Bartlett What I want to emphasize here is that the line of lampposts and street trees on the edge of this is the edge of the existing park. Everything on the right is that new open space we're talking about. I also want to give you a brief overview of our sustainability objectives. When we submitted our design earlier this year, we were targeting LEED Gold. That's always been a minimum for us. We're aiming much higher. We now sit at 81 points with an additional 11 alternates we are still working towards, and announced last month a commitment to LEED Platinum version 4. As a result of our sustainability focus, Met Park will achieve a minimum of 20% energy savings below the ASHRAE baseline, 50% water savings below building code, 75% carbon emissions reductions in operations, and as part of Amazon's goal, we'll be achieving 100% renewable power by 2030. With that, I'll turn it back over to John to wrap up.
Thank you, Brian. Our buildings at Met Park align with Amazon's climate pledge and advance both Amazon and Arlington County's climate goals. The project will deliver over 2 million square feet of space that will be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2030. In September, Amazon pledged to be net zero carbon by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Climate Agreement. As part of this commitment, Amazon will measure and report greenhouse gas emissions on a regular basis, implement decarbonization strategies in line with the Paris Agreement, including improved efficiency, material reduction, renewable energy, and other carbon emission elimination strategies. And any remaining emissions will be neutralized through quantifiable, real, permanent, and socially beneficial offsets by 2040. Arlington County's Community Energy Plan and Amazon's Climate Pledge show our shared leadership on climate change. We have been working closely with the county manager and his staff on our community benefit package. There's a strong alignment with our values and priorities raised by the community and county staff. First and foremost is the commitment to the creation of preservation of affordable housing units. We're committed to extraordinary open space improvements, including 1.5 acres of new open space and improvements to the existing Metropolitan Park, transportation improvements that Brian spoke about earlier, and we'll provide significant amounts of new retail in the neighborhood, as well as a daycare for 160 children. And we're also very happy to share our 700-person meeting center with the county and the community. These community benefits address key priorities that Amazon and Arlington share. It is our hope that the project design and commitments towards affordable housing, open space, transportation, retail, daycare, sustainability demonstrate the strong collaboration we have had with the community to date to create a project that we can all be proud of. We thank you for your time tonight and throughout the site plan review process, and would appreciate the Planning Commission's vote of support for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We have 8 speakers this evening.
All right, as our clerk calls your name, for the first speaker, please come to the podium. If the next speaker could please come up and sit behind staff here, that would make things efficient this evening. With that, Madam Clerk, please call the first 2 names.
Our first 2 speakers are Krista All, followed by Jonathan Morgenstein.
Good evening, Mr. All.
Good evening, everyone. In Crystal CCCRC, the Crystal City Advisory Group to the County Board, multi-stakeholder group, including the applicant. I hope you forgive me if, with that affiliation, I focus first on some broader issues rather than diving directly into some Met Park features. Arlington is having a rare opportunity for major development and revenue increases to meet our financial challenges. We must be ready to adapt and take advantage of this fortuitous situation. So this should dominate, for instance, our upcoming centennial celebrations rather than a retrospect on the smart growth concept and the untenable tolerance for having 80% of our land ruled out for density, despite our housing dilemma. Cramming all the density into a few small areas also stresses our infrastructure, creates tensions, and causes mitigation needs. But so far, we hear more about business as usual for reliance on existing policies and processes. We are told that planning, project reviews, and funding methods should move in old tracks, when perhaps we need at least a temporary adaptation to this new reality. The dominating landowner in our area, with numerous projects coming, seems ready to embrace holistic community planning rather than piecemeal building construction, which the community appreciates. And laudably, the civic associations in the area themselves have developed a united approach for the overall area. The focus is on big picture and longer term needs within an enlightened livability framework. Our community has already sought county support for this approach, and we see you as a pivotal entity in this vital endeavor. More than ever, we need you as a true planning commission, as the honest brokers with overarching thinking. But we worry that your workload may increasingly force you to focus more on individual SPRCs. Such a trend, if combined with an understandable need for streamlining, could limit the room both for a holistic perspective and for an SPRC dialogue that community members will see as complete and meaningful. As one specific remedy, could we not ensure fuller pre-SPRC information to give all the participants a better understanding and preparation before they are at a table in fast-paced discussions? Open space is an aspect where the reliance on major post-SPRC planning with emphasis on county-wide needs makes the community think that local priorities may be neglected and that the SPRC process does little to offer assurance of what might eventually emerge. It seems that both in normal SPRCs with limited scope for open space planning and in cases like Met Park, there is no reason why initial county ideas and arguments could not be offered much earlier. Transportation is in our area a zero-sum game with competing modes and priorities within absolute limits in the form of highways and railroad. And our north-south arteries are especially vulnerable. Complete streets sound so right, but not when the space is simply not there. A capacity review and new thinking is urgently needed in our area as we hope to move from car reliance to other modes. For Met Park, we appreciate some efforts in the area of transportation, but we are concerned that after the SPRC discussions, the focus on facilitation of increased metro rail use through a new station entrance is not being mentioned. On the other aspects of Met Park, there have been many positive remarks about the effort to ensure interesting architecture and suitable massing. And it's positive that sculpting is overtaking a simplistic focus on height when a pleasing skyline is pursued. We are aware of the availability of formal meeting space for community use after hours, but this is really not a good replacement for the kind of dedicated community indoor space that we have been hoping for. Overall, the community, more than perhaps they expected from the beginning, see strong reasons for supporting Met Park as is being proposed, with as many strong points. And of course, the open space as the primary aspect, but also aspects like childcare. Transportation is seen as a mixed bag. And finally, even with $20 million, we hear views that the attention to affordable housing is somewhat disappointing.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
thank you for your attention and thank you for your dedication.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Morgenstein is followed by Robert Mando.
Good evening, Mr. Morgenstein.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Morgenstein. I'm currently the Vice Chair of the Energy Committee. I also sit on the Environment and Energy Conservation Commission, but I'm speaking right now in my own personal capacity. I'll first say that I do appreciate the significant elements of this plan that do make this project much more green than originally the plans were. But I'd like to encourage Amazon to still do much better. Last week, the United Nations released their annual emissions gap report. According to the New York Times, quote, "The summary findings are bleak. We need deeper and faster carbon cuts now. This must happen, quote, if the world is to avoid the worst effects of climate change, including more intense droughts, stronger storms, and widespread hunger by mid-century." Unless we take serious action, we can expect a, quote, temperature rise that sharply increases the likelihood of extreme weather events, the accelerating melting of glaciers, swelling of seas, all endangering the lives of billions of people. This is not Amazon's fault, but as literally the wealthiest corporation in the history of humanity, you have a unique opportunity in your hands right here and right now. You are a global leader and change maker. You have a chance to wow the world in your commitments to leading the globe in combating these literally apocalyptic climate change events that are bearing down on all of us. Amazon could become the shining icon of climate stewardship, commensurate with your capacity to do good. If you replace the diesel generator with a zero-emission storage, if you meet the zero carbon certification, if you expedite your commitment to 100% renewables from day one, if you commit to only fueling your commercial kitchens with biogas, or even better, electric zero-emissions kitchens, if you commit to not only, yes, the solid LEED Platinum and Energy Star ratings, but also to LEED 4.1 operations and maintenance Platinum rating to ensure top energy performance into the future. If you committed to actively advancing our transition from combustion to electric vehicles and an exclusively EV Amazon Arlington fleet, if you did all this, along with the items that my colleague John Bloom will mention later tonight, you'd be assuming a leadership role worthy of the wealthiest corporation in human history. Amazon's pledges so far are pretty good. We appreciate working to parallel the CEP's goals, as you all just mentioned. But pretty good really isn't what Amazon should be aspiring to. Amazon should be aspiring to a landmark wonder of the world. Amazon should be looking at this moment in time when you have resources of technology and wealth unprecedented since the dawn of humans. Amazon should be striving for an accomplishment befitting this moment to help all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgenstein.
Robert Mandel is followed by John Bloom.
Good evening. Hopefully the Kanye West effect doesn't rear its head for me here on the microphone. Good evening. My name is Rob Mandel. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Crystal City Business Improvement District. As a brief reminder, that now includes, within our boundary, portions of Pentagon City, which includes this project. I'd like to briefly emphasize the bid support for the project that's before you this evening. The proposed amendments to the PDSP and the site plan go a long way towards fulfilling many goals and objectives outlined in both the Pentagon City PDSP and the bid's area-wide strategic plan, and critical to creating an economically sustainable neighborhood with an unparalleled quality of life for residents, employees, and visitors. As proposed, the project furthers the goals of a more mixed-use urban neighborhood by incorporating office development within an otherwise strictly residential block. It contributes to the quality of the public realm with a new dynamic open space. It enhances connectivity through improved urban design, inclusion of retail-activated streets, and pushes the county towards more holistic application of complete streets principles with its focus on the pedestrian and next-generation bicycle infrastructure. Perhaps most interestingly and most importantly, it will help to realize a more inclusive community through a sizable affordable housing contribution. The collective Arlington community of residents, staff, and property owners have spent decades developing plans that leverage economic growth, developing to support a high quality of life. This project is a good example of this work bearing very sweet fruit, and I'm not just talking about the banana cart. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel.
John Bloom is followed by James Wise.
Good evening.
Good evening. I serve as Vice Chair of E2C2 and Chair of its Energy Committee, and I'm pleased to provide testimony on behalf of both groups today. The context of my comments is that the two advisory bodies I represent are deeply involved in Arlington's climate action policy and planning efforts. We're proud that Arlington is the first county in Virginia to adopt in September the twin goals of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050 and 100% renewable electricity community-wide by 2035. As challenging as those goals will be, the latest scientific findings that my colleague just mentioned show that much more will be required over time, and that acting quickly is especially important if we're to avoid the worst climate impacts. I'm not saying all this just to be a downer. I think the context helps explain why we can look at a project like this that is truly excellent by Arlington's past energy standards, and still see room for improvement. The other part of the context is that we think Amazon is the right company at the right time to provide the corporate partnership and leadership that our new community energy plan desperately needs to succeed, to lead the way, in other words. So we believe what happens here will influence many millions of square feet in projects that follow at a critical juncture. So what would we like to see at this point in the process? Our biggest request from the outset has been for Amazon to make this project zero carbon certified. Zero carbon, as I think most people know, is a new designation adopted by Arlington that aligns with the community energy plan's goals. It's like net zero for those familiar with that concept, but allows the building owner to procure renewable energy offsite as well as onsite, which is a much easier target for enormous buildings like this. It's our understanding that Amazon is not yet committed to achieving zero carbon, but hasn't ruled it out either. So we'd like to take this opportunity to urge Amazon to take this step for the climate and for the Arlington community. It would be a cause for celebration and make well-deserved headlines as the world's largest zero-carbon buildings. This opportunity appears to be within reach, and we would hate to see it slip away. There are several sub-requirements of zero carbon that it seems to us Amazon is close to reaching. Amazon has said it will offset 100% of the energy used through offsite purchases by 2030. If it could speed up this commitment by a couple of years, this aspect of the project could qualify for zero carbon certification. Also, since they seem to be using this as a community benefit, we'd like to see their commitment to renewable energy included as a site plan condition, if it is not already. Amazon has said that the buildings will be all electric except for emergency generation, which would be diesel, and commercial kitchens, which would be gas. We'd like to see Amazon find creative ways to eliminate or at least reduce these on-site fossil fuel uses, which is also a requirement of zero carbon. And we'd also like to see Amazon's commitment to an all-electric building, with any exceptions noted, included as a site plan condition. Amazon has made a number of helpful commitments regarding multimodal transportation goals. We would like to see the company also adopt policies and programs to encourage electric vehicle usage and carpooling by those employees who nevertheless commute to work by car. We'd also like to see Amazon commit to an all-EV fleet of company cars at HQ2. Of course, E2C2 also cares about other environmental issues. We're strong believers in the value of not just open space, but green space for quality of life and for the environment. And we support efforts to make Arlington a biophilic city. We look forward to participating fully in the upcoming park master planning process for the new Met Park and related design guidelines for the linear park and other public spaces. Finally, I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for their attention to these issues and for doing a great job running a challenging SPRC process. We appreciate your concern for the climate and environment, and we look forward to working with you over time on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
James Wise is followed by Sarah Boglicki.
Evening.
Good evening. My name is James Wise. I'm a resident of the Southampton Condominiums, a 220-unit low-rise community bounded by 15th Street, Hayes Street, and South Fern Street. So that puts us at the sort of leading edge of Amazon's arrival. I've spoken to several neighbors in the community who share some of these concerns, but I am here in my own capacity. I am a little bit concerned here that the approval of yet another high-rise building in the neighborhood represents a pretty significant change in the character of this area. This is still a residential area, and there are those of us who appreciate the view shed. and the size of the buildings raised continued concerns about both that view shed and the increasing impact of echo effect from airport traffic. So I appreciate the progress that's been made thus far by Amazon and the changes that have been proposed thus far. But taken as part of the entire neighborhood, we are seeing a real constriction of the view shed, and I think that that needs to be considered very much as part of the objectives, as part of Objective 6 of the master plan. In other words, it's not just the height of the individual building, but it's the community, it's the neighborhood, and we're depending on you to not let us turn into Roslyn completely. So I can tell you, just in the few years that I have been a resident, there's been a real decrease in the variance and an increase in construction and thus building heights. So we have real concerns about these additional projects. And finally, I would note on a different topic, with respect to street improvements, I'm a little bit concerned. I think the 15th Street improvements need to be extended west all the way to South Hayes Street. Otherwise, I'm very concerned that what you're going to get is a funneling of bike and other traffic into a more narrow area around Costco, which if you've ever been there on a Saturday morning, you know the situation there is getting worse, and it's much more significant just in the last few years again than it has been. And I'm concerned that if we don't take those improvements around the proposed area of the project and extend them all the way, all you're going to do is you're going to create more traffic and more pedestrian traffic and bike traffic into a narrow area around Costco, and that's going to be really dangerous. So I'd encourage the commission to consider that as a potential further amendment to the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise.
Sarah Baliki is followed by Ben Diavanzo.
Good evening.
Good evening. I am also a resident of the Southampton community, so I will shortly be your neighbor. I am also a Washington State to Arlington transplant, so welcome. I have very similar concerns to what Mr. Wise mentioned. I think that significantly to me, part of the appeal of Pentagon City over other areas in Arlington, such as Roslyn, such as Clarendon, are that the space is a little less high-risey. Obviously, with new neighbors that are bringing business and growth to the community, we expect that we're going to have a significant amount of building. My biggest concerns are the density of the area as well as parking and traffic modifications. I would actually urge the committee not to approve the parking modifications. My understanding is that Arlington County is in the process of revisiting their residential parking permit program, which may bring parking up to a whole new issue in all of Arlington. And when we lost one run of the Blue Line several years ago, we started to run into commuter issues on that front. We also don't have a dedicated bus lane in the area. So while I appreciate that Amazon is looking to encourage employees to use alternate forms of transportation, I will say that our neighborhood does not necessarily lend itself to that as well as it might. And I think that as buildings are being built in the area with less parking than should be applied for the number of people in them, we are going to run into very, very serious issues with parking and transportation. I can tell you that now at 8 a.m. in the morning or 5 o'clock at night, it can take you 4 cycles to get through stoplights in the area because traffic is already that heavy. So in addition to, I appreciate all the green space, the neighbors will love you forever if you put a dog park in. And I appreciate that Amazon is going to bring new and interesting business, but I do think that density and parking and transportation should be major issues, and I don't think that the current proposals in the plan actually are going to be beneficial for the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Diavanzo is followed by Michael Dowell.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ben Devanzo. I represented Aurora Highlands on the SPRC.
And I also live in Southampton as well, so just a couple of blocks from where the site is going to be. So very invested in having a good outcome, and you can read our comments a lot more in detail in the letter that was provided and is in the packet. I want to summarize a few key points as well as get to some information that came out after or the same day that we sent the letter. So first, I'd characterize that this is an overall positive development. It replaces an outdated warehouse. The design overall is nice. It breaks up both the uses and the styles of the area. And so we are pretty pleased with the architecture, with the exception that we do not believe that the crowns of the buildings are in line with the Met Park guidelines, which require them to be more distinctive. 14th Street breaks up the block. That's positive, and we're very happy about the green space, although I'll get to that a little bit later. The retail usage as well, I just want to make a comment on. We're happy that Amazon in the presentations and the architects made it clear that the different retail outlets would have different frontages in terms of their design, which is nice. In regards to the community benefits, as this is the information that came out on the same day that we actually sent the letter, and I acknowledge that we're kind of operating with incomplete information, and I'd say it'd be really nice if we actually understood the calculations that went into converting the square footage into the proposed benefits. So it's really hard to calculate whether the amount of dollars going to affordable housing is appropriate, because we don't know how much that calculation actually led to, and actually when that negotiation happened. In addition, reading the report, it appears there will be no mitigation, although it might be unclear from the presentation as well, due to the reduced parking spaces, contrary to the adopted office parking policy. This is the first site plan, I believe, that is adopted under that policy. So that is kind of strange and disappointing. Going to the previous speaker's point, there's so little attention in the site plan, in this whole discussion around public transportation, no analysis about whether or not the metro entrances will be able to absorb the new users, whether the bus lines are able to as well, especially considering the desire to reduce car use. We are overall kind of a little disappointed as well that the mitigation is only focused on the site itself. The fact that we have proposed some ideas around how the mitigation can be looked at for park space elsewhere, transportation improvements elsewhere, and we think that's an important discussion to have, and we would encourage it. Regarding the park, so it's really great that the park is going to happen, that there's going to be an overall visioning of it, that Amazon has committed to perpetuity maintaining of the park. That's really important. The question we would pose is it appropriate for the full value of that park to be counted as a mitigation, considering it is basically Amazon's front yard and a major benefit and value to them? A couple concrete things. The conference space is actually not included, as far as I can tell, in the site plan itself. There's no information about it, and we do not consider 4 times a year to be really a community benefit. We would say once a month and open to beyond just the county, but to community groups itself. We would encourage inclusion specifically, as Amazon has informally agreed to not slotting daycare slots for Amazon employees, as well as Amazon has already hired, but making sure that this continues in the long term, a community representative to ensure good relations. In terms of the process, we really appreciate the work that the chairs of the SPRC and all of you did to contribute to this really important, really challenging process. You know, the chairs deserve awards in terms of facilitating meetings. It was challenging. We really appreciate that. We felt like we did have the chance to speak, and we appreciate the developers also being in conversation with us. But as Krista said, we do think the overall kind of situation presents some challenges to both you and us, and we actually think looking at the PDSP update or other future opportunities are going to be really smart in terms of site by site. There's many, many thousands of residential and office units coming down the pike. We really think we need a process to work all together, with the Planning Commission really playing a leadership role in thinking through what are the really broad needs for the community. So again, thank you. In terms of anything else, we referred you to our letter, but we really appreciate both the developers, the county, and the Planning Commission members in terms of working with us in this process, and hope that our comments will be considered. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Michael Dowell, I'm sorry, Mike.
Dowell, thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Dow.
Hi. Mike Dowell, resident of Aurora Highlands, speaking as a private resident this evening in support of the Met Park site plan. We welcome this site plan, look forward to engaging with Amazon JBG on the upcoming Penn Place. The affordable housing commitment is welcome, as others have stated. Housing of all kinds, from low income up into the middle income levels, becoming a constraint on a livable community in our area. We like the open space park, and the selection of the prominent designer is very welcome. Look forward to that. We ask that the local Met Park residents be engaged in this design process. Likewise, the protected bike lanes and community daycare facility make progress on critical needs in our area. In our area, you need to actually reserve your daycare spot before your child is even conceived. So this is good. This is good to see this. Welcome the use of the large meeting facility. As Ben said, we'd like to get a little bit more usage out of it. If we get monthly usage, that would be very helpful. And then in our community letter to this commission, we brought up the larger picture of needs in this area, not because they're all supposed to be fixed by this site plan, but because you as commissioners really should be aware of the larger issues, and also because there's no presently good forum to address those issues. Opening an office is something that happens all the time in our area. You lease a space, hire some young tech workers, run them hard for a few years, and move on. We all know how that works. I see those folks' resumes all the time. But opening a headquarters requires a different commitment. Company can't just attract workers, they have to retain them and develop over the years their next generation of leadership. To do that requires those people stick around, and that requires not just a great place to work, but a great place to live. We know that because we live here. To bring all that development that's coming into our area, maintain a high quality life, requires that we strongly focus on livability. We're convinced Amazon JBG get that. They get that their long-term success is heavily tied to keeping Arlington County a great place to live, even with all this development. However, to be successful, we need to establish the right forum to pull the critical stakeholders together to make the area-wide collaborative, holistic planning happen. And as planning commissioners, you're a big part of getting to that success. There's an update to the Pentagon City PDSP coming. We look forward to your engagement, whether through referral of items that are in our letter or ongoing other discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dowell. Was that our last speaker? All right. Thank you to all our public speakers. We'll now turn to any commissions with us this evening. I see Mr. Ross from Park and Rec Commission. If you want to lead things off for us.
Good evening. I'm Bill Ross, Chair of the Park and Rec Commission, and we had sent a letter on this project, and I just wanted to offer a couple of other additional comments. First, we wanted to say we appreciated the applicant's proposed focus on the outdoor features of this site, which I think will really enhance the residential and commercial experience in this part of Arlington. The proposed additional square footage provided by the park extension and the public plazas are welcome additions, and we understand that this is above and beyond, that's what's called from the Met Park design guidelines. The proposed layout, we believe, in reviewing it as a commission, is superior in terms of the public space and the urban design compared with the previous designs we had seen here. We have the two private plaza areas, should allow for more visibility of the park, coming both from Eade Street and 15th Street. As you know, looking at the old site, the old design, we see these either partially or completely enclosed open spaces in terms of private accessibility, and that's been taken care of, at least by what we see as planned. We look forward to participating in the county-run engagement process for the design of these spaces and the commitment by the applicant to maintain the entire 2 acres should really enhance the sustainability of the parks and the open space. And we also know that it's in the applicant's and the public's interest to get the public spaces developed as soon as possible with this project. want to make a quick comment on the announced $14 million commitment to the open space. First of all, it reminds us of the cost of developing these successful public spaces in the county. And it's also a good example and perhaps a signal for what we might want to expect on future projects in our urban corridors. The plans for applying green roofs and usable plazas with biophilic features to the private areas of this building are welcomed by the Commission, as are the plans for the internal dog runs and the bird-friendly lower floor designs that we saw discussed. And then finally, we look forward to the building of the Eat streetscape, which we assume will provide some really park-like features and successful pedestrian and bicycle activated retail environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross, or Chairman Ross, I should say. Are there any other commissions here that would like to speak? Okay, then that matter is now with the commission. I'd like to now turn to Transportation Commission. Our representative, Commissioner Lentelmi.
Thank you. This was heard last Monday at the Transportation Commission meeting. Before the Transportation Commission was the vacation of the, or the demapping of a portion of a street in the Metropolitan Park Plan, and of course the site plan itself. The discussion pretty much revolved around the parking on the site and the ratio. The question really was, are 4 parking levels below this building really appropriate? And are 2,000 spaces? They seem to be quite a lot given what the overall intent of the applicant and the county is. Ultimately, that was resolved in that the Transportation Commission felt this was okay and did end up approving 10-1 in favor with the 1 dissenter, again, continuing to believe that the parking was being overparked. The Transportation Commission was very, very happy about the bicycle element, particularly the cycle track being added along the entire length of Ead Street. That, combined with other developments in the pipeline right now, will mean that we will have a cycle track that will be going all the way south to 23rd Street south. So overall, it was approved by Transportation Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Lentelmi. And I'd now like to turn to Commissioner Gearin for her report as the SBRC chair, co-chair.
Thank you. So just quick review, this proposal is for Met Park 6, 7, and 8 for Amazon's HQ2 commercial buildings. The applicant and JBG Smith, the development manager, are proposing to construct 2 new 22-story office and commercial buildings with more than 2 million square feet of gross floor area, including ground floor retail and retail equivalent, including daycare, shared underground parking, conference room space, offices, and open space. This site is the last undeveloped area of Met Park. The neighboring civic associations include Arlington Ridge, Aurora Highlands, and Crystal City. So tonight, PC is considering an application for an amendment to the Pentagon City Phase Development Site Plan, the PDSP, to convert the allocation of residential dwelling units for Parcel 3 to office and commercial use, and to construct 2 new office buildings of 22 stories, and to eliminate the requirement to convey certain streets to the county in fee simple. And we're also considering a site plan amendment to construct 2 new 22-story office buildings as described, with modifications for parking ratios, penthouse height, additional density, exclusions from gross floor area, and other use modifications. We met 5 times to discuss this, starting in July. We had an overall community meeting to let everyone know what was coming, and then we had an LRPC Long-Range Planning Committee meeting, and then 3 SPRC meetings, including a walking tour. Issues raised. I'll go with LRPC first. This is when we considered changes to the PDSP, and from the PDSP, the applicant had the ability to construct 2 22-story residential buildings on the site. So what we considered was not whether or not 2 buildings belonged on the site, but whether they could be office buildings rather than residential, and changes to the MTP. There were no substantial opposition to this, and in fact, we felt that it was within the realm of possibility to consider those changes to the PDSP. The SPRC process concluded with a general consensus that the project's development, including the mix of uses within the development and the infrastructure improvements provided, conformed to the adopted plans and policies against which the development was reviewed. The GLUP, the Arlington County Retail Plan, the Pentagon City Master Development Plan, the Met Park Design Guidelines, and others. And we felt that this implemented the vision for this area with the built-out streetscapes, the Eade Street Linear Park, and the updated Met Park. Throughout the SPRC process, many issues arose and were subsequently addressed. And I'll go generally in the order in which we faced them at our SPRC meetings. With regard to site design and architecture, there was an overall appreciation for the design and the architecture. SPRC members expressed interest in the fin details and the frontage facing on a new public plaza adjacent to the public green space. SPRC members raised concerns about a desire for a more varied facade of the buildings on Eade Street and for increased height tapering to lower height buildings to the west in order to adhere to the guidelines. As proposed, Met Park 6 offers height variation from 3 stories adjacent to the plaza to 22 stories Bartlett, and Met Park 7 and 8 ranges from 3 stories along 15th Street and at the corner of 14th and Eads to 22 stories in the middle of the building. The facades are broken up with tapering, as well as differing materials and articulation, including the translucent fins. There were queries for more biophilic design, as well as greater adherence to the recently adopted CEP, and those resulted in changes including a commitment to LEED Platinum and to Energy Star certifications, an electric utility plant for building heating and cooling and hot water, and occupiable and green terraces for tenants, as well as bird-friendly glass. Additionally, the project will extend the linear park along South Eads. With regard to transportation, members raised issues about pedestrian and cyclist safety around the site, and as part of the proposed development, existing bike lanes on South Eads and 15th Street South are being upgraded to protected bike lanes, and further to the north and east of the site, providing connections to existing buffered bike lanes on South Eads to 4 Mile Run and 15th Street South to Joyce Street and Army Navy Drive. Protected intersections, including Arlington's first fully protected intersection, and floating bus islands are also being provided. With regard to public and open space, there was some concern about timing in the process for completing and updating Met Park with this addition of green space. This underscores the concerns that we hear from the community about the need for more open and green space in South Arlington. When the Met Park design guidelines were developed in 2004, they did not consider the possibility of multiple owners of the Central Park, nor of a park master plan process. So Amazon has taken responsibility for the park development concurrent with office building development. They've committed to implement the results of the PMP for the entire two-acre site. There were discussions about site plan mitigation, and throughout the SPRC, the applicant was responsive to measures or amenities to mitigate the impact of the proposed development. General site plan mitigation includes the following. With regard to transportation, the installation of new traffic lights, traffic signal upgrades, new street segments, protected bike lanes, floating bus islands with shelters. A transportation demand management plan, including the ground floor secure bike facilities. This is in excess of our typical site plan standards, showers and lockers for office and retail employees, Metro Smart Trip cards for all on-site employees, including the retail employees. LEED Platinum under the most current version of the standards, affordable housing contribution, public space improvements, additional retail and retail equivalent, including the daycare center, which is an identified need in our county, more daycare, public art fund contribution or on-site public art with a value of $225,000. In addition, community benefits associated with the extra density sought include a total of $20 million for affordable housing, a commitment to fund and implement the redesign of the entire two-acre public site with an estimated value of $14 million, the protected bike lanes on South Eade Street, public use of the building's event space for county-sponsored uses at least 4 times a year, and sustainable design commitments. Construction and staging issue concerns were raised regarding vehicle access during the construction and the site area for staging and storing materials. Some possible areas we might want to discuss, and here I've added to the report that's shared with my colleagues to accommodate some of the issues that were raised in the public comment tonight. With regard to architecture and design, is the tapering shown enough? Are the roof lines well defined? Is there general satisfaction that this building is as green as it can be? It is very close to zero carbon certification. What would it take to get a little bit closer? Some confirmation of the bird-friendly design. We understand that the glass on the lower levels is bird-friendly. Some confirmation that we have site plan conditions that demonstrate this commitment to renewable energy through the future. With regard to the park, some sense of what the timing is for the park development, including the process for engagement, and whether the linear park will be included in the scoping for the PMP process. With regard to transportation, what is the parking pay structure? What does the EV parking look like? Is the shared parking in the evenings and after hours at county rates, or is it free? What does the projected daycare traffic look like, including pickup? With regard to construction, what pedestrian and bike routes are likely to be impacted? Will construction employees be union workers? Is the proposed wage a living wage? Are there efforts to outreach qualified minority and women business-owned firms and local firms? With regard to community benefits, is there a way to allocate the affordable housing contribution for affordable housing in the community? And are there tools to use some of these funds to facilitate current resident retention? How are we codifying the public use of the event space? Can the opportunities be expanded beyond 4 times a year? With regard to the retail, if 15th Street wasn't seen as a retail area, and there's some discussion about whether it was or wasn't, can we hear more about why this change makes sense to the applicant and staff and how it will be managed? Is there applicant interest in funding affordable childcare slots for low-income families in the daycare center? Then there are some additional issues which fall outside the scope of the SPRC, but which my colleagues may wish to discuss so that we can raise them so they might be included in a future larger planning process. Opportunities to set up funds for issues about which we don't yet know enough, including how the tax increment financing works in the area, the strategic identification of more open or green space, and the analysis of transit capacity, including discussion of a new Pentagon City Metro entrance. Are there other issues we'd want to add to this list?
So I think we should have some discussion of the PDSP. That should be part of this, I think. And then also, if folks have questions about the Met Park design guidelines, let's have them under architecture. So yes, Commissioner Siegel.
I think I'd like to suggest we talk about conformance with the design guidelines. You may want to put that before architecture or with it. Doesn't matter to me as long as we have the item.
Yep.
And then I'd also like to talk on other community issues. I'd like to have tick on process or processes. I'll explain what I mean when we get to it. Or would you like me to explain now?
A little introduction to what you might discuss would be helpful, I think.
I have noted that, and we all have noted, I think, that there's a lot of consternation, really angst, about Mr. All, I think Mr. Devanzo and Mr. Dow pointed to it in their comments about how the increased density, and there's bonus density of 585,000 square feet coming in right now in an SPRC, when we really don't have a plan for Pentagon City. We have a sector plan for Crystal City. We don't have a plan for Pentagon City. I know there are things in the works, but I would like to have staff present something on that later.
Okay, we can certainly ask about what staff has for the next planning process, which we can have that. Okay, Commissioner McSweeney.
So this might overlap a little bit with that, but there were some general comments about SPRC in general. I know we probably won't resolve them tonight, but I thought it might be worthwhile putting them on the list. And then there was a call by a few different speakers about a permanent liaison with the community to ensure continued cooperation. I thought that might be worth discussion.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Yes, Commissioner Morton.
Under transportation, I'd like to talk about micromobility options, and under community benefits, I'd like to talk about public art.
All right, thank you. Others? Okay, yes.
I just wanted to get a little bit more clarification on this page 35 of the staff report about staff not supporting the dedication of streets that have any portion of garage underneath to be consistent with current practice.
Okay, we can get a clarity on that. All right. Easements. All right, anything else? All right. So let's start with any questions about just the PDSP in general. Any questions about the modifications that are being sought? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to Met Park design guidelines architecture. So Commissioner Siegel?
I actually brought this up because I wanted to thank JBG Smith in particular. Well before the plans for the massing of the two new buildings, Met 6, 7, and 8, had been even put on paper, I believe. I had some conversations with the developer about a Met 6 that is no longer Met 6 that's been replaced by today's proposal. And I just wanted to thank the developer for their sensitivity. I also wanted to say how it was a great learning experience for me to see the evolution and what could be properly massed within the Robert F. Stern guidelines that compose the design guidelines. So I just wanted to say I'm really very happy with the outcome. And I think the sort of theme and variation is very exciting. I think it has depth. I think it will make up for the loss of viewshed. That's only my opinion. I don't live in Southampton condominiums, but I would advance that for them to consider.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Olenselmi.
Yes, this is something that I did raise at SPRC, and Mr. Devanzo also has raised this. First, I want to preface it saying that the architecture of this building, as far as I'm concerned, is excellent. It is a level above what we often see here at Planning Commission, so I'm very happy with the high level of quality that you're bringing forward to us. That said, the concern I have is whether the crown of the building does meet the requirements of the sector plan. Is this really a landmark crown that would be noticed, seen, would be a standout throughout the area? Again, it's very handsome, and it's a continuation of the theme from the bottom to the top, but does it rise to the level of something that really is a standout? I throw that out there. Is there something that could be done to make it more prominent, I suppose, that it would then meet the intent of the sector plan? That's my comment.
All right, thank you. Any other kind of questions, comments on architecture? Yes, Commissioner Morton.
Just picking up on that point, when I look at the crown illustrated in these design guidelines, I'm personally not convinced that this is really deficient compared to what I'm seeing here in terms of outlining a crown. I don't necessarily feel there needs to be some sort of distinct, pronounced horizontal element. I mean, if you look at things like the Seagram Building or Lever House, which certainly make a contribution to the skyline in other cities. I do feel there's enough variation in massing and height, if that's really one of the concerns about having a crown. In some of the earlier renderings, I didn't necessarily see it here. It sort of looks like the variation, there's some variation of material and lighting that makes it look, I think I said before, sort of like a softer luminescent crown as opposed to, again, a very, a cap. So I see where you're coming from. I'm personally satisfied with the crown aspect.
All right, thank you. If there aren't any other comments on architecture specifically, let's move on to the zero carbon certification that has come up and the LEED certification. Are there any kind of questions around that? Commissioner Siegel.
Yeah, I'd like to direct My question to the developer, to Amazon. I know through the process you started at LEED Gold and you've worked your way up to LEED Platinum with the other programs and principles to support that. So is your process finished now, and that you have no intention to keep pushing the envelope, as was suggested by our Energy Commission? That's one question. I have one other question for you after that.
Sure. Thank you for your question. So we're working towards securing new renewable energy to power our HQ2 campus in Arlington. We're close to completing an agreement on a large solar project, and we will update you once it's finalized. As planned, this project will fully power our HQ2 campus and will be located in the Virginia area with the local utility electric system. The renewable energy project is expected to be operational along the same timeline as our buildings, operational at the end of Q3 2023. The project site and environmental impact is subject to state environmental regulations and review. Our initial review has not shown any environmental concerns. Further, the Met Park is being designed consistent with Amazon's climate pledge and commitment to 100% renewable energy by 2030 and net zero carbon by 2040. We are studying that certification among others. However, we are breaking new ground with these buildings with some of the ILFI particular requirements might not be directly applicable to this project of this scale. We're working with ILFI to discuss those challenges. Independent of whether we pursue that particular certification, we will be purchasing 100% net new carbon and renewable energy for these buildings, and any remaining emissions will be offset with additional quantifiable and permanent offsets to achieve net zero annual carbon emissions. I would ask also Tom Palladino, our energy consultant and on this project, if he'd like to add any comments.
Thank you. So did that answer your question?
Not directly, but I infer from it that you are continuing to work on improving the climate profile of the building using off-site renewable energy. I mean, if you could just add to that, whether that might mean that instead of by 2030, it might be by 2028 or something like that. In other words, can you speed up your timeline? Are you working on doing that with maybe some of the suggestions from our commission? Or is your goal set fixed?
I guess the way to understand where the project is and where the goals are for Amazon as a corporation is Amazon's taken a very long view of moving their entire company to net zero energy first, then net zero carbon second. This project has to make a lot of assumptions on how much energy will be used. So a juice bar uses a different amount of energy than a pizza restaurant. All of that's unknown currently. So the playbook is to measure all the emissions, decarbonize where possible, and then offset with projects to get to zero. And that plan is a fixed plan. It's a plan to get to zero as soon as the knowns are known.
So for example, thank you for that. That helps. It was suggested that you go to an all-electric kitchen, for example, and eschew natural gas. What about that?
So all-electric kitchens in commercial restaurants is a very new frontier. So it's unknown whether the particular vendors that get selected are ready for that. But the Amazon sustainability team is committed to offsetting any combustion that the restaurants use as part of that pledge. So think about it as there's appropriate technology. If the technology takes you to zero, the goal has been achieved. If the technology only gets you halfway, the offset gets you to zero, and the end result is zero carbon.
Okay. One more final question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There is a concern that using offsets off-site for renewable energy could kill off some forests, displace some trees, and I was just wondering how you think about that. That's, of course, up to the utility because they're providing your off-site installation, but I wondered what you thought about that.
Well, the commitment is to site the renewable infrastructure within Virginia and within the grid. So it's within the local jurisdiction and within review of boards like this. So there's an intent to locate the infrastructure within the affected area of where people live and work. So in some sense, it's a bit of an honor system to be a good neighbor because the system will be installed here, not some faraway place. And that's a good start, I think.
Okay, thank you.
If I may pick up on this, and I will come to you, Commissioner Geer, and and then I'll come to you, Commissioner Steinberger. The applicant mentioned that there was an EIS essentially going on for the proposal currently for the solar farm. Roughly how big is it in nameplate capacity?
There's a range that we're looking at, and so again, the goal is to have a new facility that will fully power our headquarters operations here in Arlington. The range that we're looking at is 80 megawatts to somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 megawatts facility. Again, all those final details are being worked out. We're not ready to make an announcement at this point.
Okay. Commissioner Geer and then Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz, thank you for an excellent report. Can you tell us how we might interpret the site plan conditions to make sure that we're getting these green accomplishments? I'm looking at the pages regarding the LEED certification, and I'm not sure how to interpret it because it looks like the developer agrees to comply with some combination of the LEED credits.
I will refer that question to my colleague, Joanne Gabor.
Thank you, Ms. Gabor.
What page, Elizabeth?
56?
It's on, Ms. Gabor.
My name is Joanne Gabor. I'm with DES. So currently the LEED condition, our standard LEED condition does typically specify the LEED certification level and then the Arlington priority credits. What these priority questions represent are basically what Arlington is looking for, and it's basically focusing on the energy commissioning of the building and operation. So we want to make sure that there's a very energy efficient building, and that is the top portion with just the Arlington priority credits. The additional section we've added with the EAC1, EAC2, C5, that specifically talks about the enhanced commissioning and then the renewable energy. And it's EAC5 is specifically the credit that does talk about the renewable energy. The point value is basically correlated to how much of the energy is utilized from offsite. So the greater the number of points, the greater offsite energy use that is required to meet that.
So to clarify, is this sufficient for staff to go back and feel comfortable that we are ensuring the building achieves net zero by 2040 and so on? The assertions that were made?
So staff is comfortable with this language. It is something that we have worked out with the applicant that does meet the goals that we have. I'll let the applicant have any further discussion or anything they want to add.
Thank you.
So LEED is a menu system, and we've highlighted some parts of the menu that we commit to pursuing. And that biases the project towards an energy bias as opposed to some other environmental impact area. So we've responded to the ask from the implications of the CEP and E2C2. In terms of getting to zero, LEED does not require you to get to zero. The climate pledge made by Amazon will get the project to zero. It follows a path that's not currently outlined by a certification program for a building of this size. So we're really talking about different paths to zero.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Ms. Gabor, thank you very much, sir. I think what we're hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the site plan conditions require the LEED components, as was just explained, but does not require the additional commitments that have been made to go beyond LEED. Is that correct?
That is correct. One of the, when we were looking at crafting this condition, we wanted to make sure we had something that was LEED certified, so it's third party, that we could basically use as the third party certification program, and LEED is that venue and the easiest system to use just because it is so well known.
Okay. Anything else?
So would it work for us to attach to the site plan conditions this promise from Amazon, this certification, that they plan to be net zero carbon by 2040?
I think the challenge is how do you define that? My fear would be that since we don't have language already written about that, and it's not something that we have done before, I wouldn't want to end up writing something that hamstrings us in the future on some technicality. So with the LEED condition, we feel that is something that we as staff are comfortable with because it is something that's third party and it has been verified.
Thank you.
Commissioner Steinberger and then Commissioner Giacomini.
Thank you. So I wanted to follow up after Commissioner Siegel's questions about the kitchen uses and sort of switching them from a non-renewable source to a renewable source. And my question with that is, it would seem to me that if making that switch, we would be intentionally or unintentionally limiting what vendors we could have in that space. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And if you could quantify the amount that such a limitation would be, like whether it would be, okay, these are made up numbers. If you're taking, 100 restaurants down to 30 restaurants, are you taking like a bigger kind of percentage cut than that? I just want to get a sense of like to quantify it, if you can. You can use made-up numbers.
I wouldn't want to speculate on that.
Okay.
There's a lot of unknowns. I think one thing I do want to emphasize here that we've done is, this is something that the industry has to figure out, right? How do we make and serve the food we all want to eat without using fossil fuels to do it? And the restaurant industry isn't there yet. But these buildings are going to evolve over time. And so one of the things that we've done is we've sized the electrical capacity of the building to accommodate all electric cooking in the restaurants and the cafeterias in the event that the industry gets where we all want to go, which is to not use fossil fuels.
Okay. So my question, that's great, because I think you lead into my follow-up question, so good job. In terms of retrofitting the kitchens to allow sort of to go from fossil fuels to the desired goal of not fossil fuels at some point in time, when as you said, the industry catches up. Is that what you just described? Is that a different process? How close, are there other design decisions we can make in the capacity of, and making these desirable locations for restaurants, but still kind of having that as an opportunity going forward to ease that transition?
I believe that's what that plan we have does, is in the event that a restaurant doesn't need to use fossil fuels, we just turn off that service and we provide them with clean electric power.
Okay.
That's really how we've trying to look into the future and anticipate. That's how we've addressed that.
So to answer my question, and tell me if I'm not understanding this, we're already there in terms of what I described. You've designed this in a capacity that will allow, to the maximum extent possible, that we can get to that desired future with the plan as it's designed.
Yes, that is my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is it a direct follow-up, Commissioner? Okay, go ahead, and then Commissioner Giacomini.
So my follow-up question is, my understanding was that the retail rents that you were planning to charge was going to possibly be lower than market rate so that you could curate the perfect sort of businesses that you want in the neighborhood. So could requiring restaurants that use electric power or that are willing to try that be something that you are doing to try to curate these kind of like perfect neighborhood environments?
And certainly something that we could consider, absolutely. When we go out and procure and curate our retail, we tell them that the building is future-proofed for all electric, and have they had an experience with that, and try to encourage them to do so.
Commissioner Giacomini and then Commissioner Patel.
Thank you. So just expanding a little bit on what Commissioner Steinberger was saying, moving even from the retail areas, I think I understand that the building that's being designed, the entire building, as we get some new systems, as things might be available, the building will probably be able to be adapted to take advantage of that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, good. Continuing with that theme, I would say for me, having the assurances of the people that are having the building built and will occupy it as to what their goal is for the energy is comforting, I guess is sort of a homey, style kind of word to say, because again, they're building it and occupying it. Generally at Planning Commission, we see buildings come in that are being proposed by developers for unknown entities. We don't know who's going to be there, so we tend to look at things and we really try to put in site plan conditions that get us what we want, because we're not talking to the people that will actually be in the building or own the building. So this is a different experience for us, and I think there is a certain amount of trust that is built up when you are talking to somebody who's actually going to be in the building. So I have a level of comfort for that. Plus a major corporation that does want to be known for being energy efficient and for being cutting edge. One last thing on the energy for me, and that is for Mr. Stout. As we deal with Dominion, we've all had varying experiences and know of varying experiences in this room. I'm hopeful that that which is being negotiated for off-site, we are sensitive to what some of the other commissioners have said, that there's not a forest being cut down and there's not a stream, a riparian area being affected. So how are we doing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are, and I would say this is we've got not only a long history of investments in solar and wind facilities across the country, but we've got a long history in Virginia as well. In October, we announced our 8th solar farm in the Commonwealth. And again, hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll be able to announce this next one. And all of those are in keeping with those corporate values, which are shared by some of what you discussed there. So that's a factor in our in that process.
Commissioner Patel and then Commissioner Weir.
I want to follow up on something that Commissioner Steinberger raised with regard to the energy, the kitchens, right? How far is the industry in meeting these standards? Because you're making the site hoping and believing that the people you'll bring in will commit to renewable energy. But if the industry is 50 years off, what you're doing may not be relevant 50 years from now. So how far is the industry in this? Do we know?
We don't know. In Seattle, we had a restaurateur that they really wanted this special pizza oven, and they weren't able to get it to be either use wood or gas, and they are using it via electricity. So, and it's an Italian pizza oven, so it was made in Italy. So there appears as though that the industry is coming along, but I can't foreshadow what they're going to be doing, other than we can just encourage them.
And so that's where some of these offsets really will come into play for Amazon.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ware.
I guess I'm just curious from a larger perspective, when Amazon talks about being carbon neutral or emissions neutral by 2040, what share of the total of the company's complete emissions or carbon pie does the real estate division make up compared to warehousing and shipping and web farms and other endeavors?
In terms of, it's a small percentage, overall small percentage of the difference between commercial office. I mean, we have hundreds of millions of square feet of fulfillment centers and globally, and 40 million square feet of office space globally. And fulfillment data centers is even a smaller portion of that, although their electrical usage is much higher than probably a fulfillment center or a office building. It's a relatively small percentage.
Commissioner Gearin on bird-friendly design?
Yeah, can you just confirm that this is bird-friendly design?
I'm happy to confirm it. We actually met with the National Audubon Society and had them review our plans. And I can't produce to you an official document from them saying that, but they were generally supportive and believe the measures we were taking met their recommendations.
I'm really delighted to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. All right, let's move on to the park and open space discussion. Any questions here? Commissioner Gearin?
Thanks, Mr. Rivero. Can you give us a little background or context for what the process for the park master plan will be like, and whether it will include the linear park on East Street?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And again, for the record, it's Marco Rivero with the Department of Parks and Recreation. So you'll see on your screen, this is actually information that was shared with the SPRC back in September, I believe, of this year, which outlines a potential park master planning process, which is very similar to ones that we have led with other park projects, namely Roslyn Highlands Park Plus a few years ago, Shortbridge Park, which is on the south end of Crystal City, and one that we anticipate in the near future as well for New Park at South Eads and Army Navy Drive. For those of you that don't know about that term, that's where the teardrop parcels are located. So just to go over some of these points. So post-approval, we will be running a park master planning process in association with the applicant and their landscape design team. We will be potentially organizing 3 engagement opportunities, which would include a background session related to existing data, visioning exercises, initial collection of community feedback, level of service data, things that just basically give us an overall sense of what we are looking at in terms of public space development for the area, but also for the needs within this particular space. With that, we will also then be providing 2 or more concepts for the park design based off of that data. I also want to highlight that as part of this community engagement process, we'll also have online engagement collected through an online questionnaire or series of questionnaires to collect county-wide feedback. Again, that's going to be during the engagement period. And then from there, we will then have a refined concept plan, which would then introduce the idea of park design guidelines, which would inform the materiality of the area of the spaces, what kinds of uses we would be considering, things of that nature. We would then bring that forward to various commissions, including the Park and Recreation Commission, Urban Forestry Commission, and also the Public Art Committee, as well as review ultimately by the county board of that park master plan and design guidelines. So it's going to be a very inclusive, egalitarian, distributed process. We don't anticipate it lasting longer than 6 months. However, that's essentially what we would be aiming at for this process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Siegel, and then Commissioner Steinberger.
So just to confirm, I think, Mr. Rivera, you could confirm, or the applicant, the park will be planned and designed with funds provided by the applicant. There's no matching issue with county CIP funds. We don't have that issue.
That's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. So just to clarify, and you may have answered my question by not saying what I'm about to ask, the park plan will not ultimately come back to Planning Commission, is that correct?
That's correct. It would come back to the commissions that we've identified here, as well as the county board.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the park maintenance plan, I saw noted in the staff report that the status that the plan is to kind of get agreement basically from the owners of parcels 1, 2, and 3 to allow the applicant to sort of run maintenance of the ultimate park. And I'm just curious, A, is my understanding correct?
Yes.
And B, what is the status of those conversations to the point, have they even occurred yet? Because
I would actually defer to the applicant.
Stumbling blocks
on
that we're
that.
anticipating there, and
Sure.
I'd just like to sort of know about those now.
Can you hear me? Yes. We have had extensive discussions with the owners of the balance of the block. We have drafted at this point a memorandum of understanding, and I think the parties are all in agreement that this is totally positive, not only to our portion of the block, but to the entire block. So we don't see any problems with getting the owners to work with us on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Guerin, then Commissioner Giacomini.
Thanks. Mr. Rivera, will this include the linear park on East Street, or is that a separate process?
I forgot to include that piece of information. So the linear park actually was discussed at length as part of the SPRC process, so it will not be included as part of the PMP process.
Thank you. Commissioner Giacomini.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify with staff that in addition to funding the design, that the applicant is funding the construction of whatever is decided.
Correct, construction as well as maintenance.
And that is somewhat of a departure because our general policy in the Crystal City Sector Plan had been, while we may get the land from developers as part of the community benefit, the county would still be the ones that had to pay for the implementation or the development of the park.
So technically, this particular park is not part of the
Right, because
Crystal
it's
City.
in Pentagon City, but
Correct.
in the neighboring one, that is how the open space would be realized.
That's correct, within the Crystal City Sector Plan, and that's the guidance that is received.
So essentially, we're going to probably get a park delivered sooner than we could in the CIP and
That's
not
correct.
using CIP funds, which could go to another open space.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
I had a question about, one of the earlier staff slides said that $14 million was going to go towards park construction and maintenance. And so how are we dividing that up between the design, the construction, the maintenance, and then what happens when that $14 million runs out?
I think that's a good question. I think that's something that we'll have to discuss further within our discussions with the applicant in terms of how all of that would be distributed and what would ultimately happen with maintenance funding afterwards. But that's an ongoing discussion.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. First of all, I'm excited by the way that the applicant has broken out what was a really inward-focused public space and sort of refreshed the nature of the public space to be more outward-facing. I do want to echo a concern that Commissioner Ross raised in his letter, just about that intersection with Eads and 14th. If you look at like slide 25, I'm just curious about the interface. I do share some of his concerns about the visibility and the permeability and the sightlines into the park. And I'm just wondering, I know when you talk about 14th Street, you say there'll be a special pavement and you won't have cars parked there to encourage pedestrian flow, but I'm just wondering, I'd like, I guess, to encourage you, like Commissioner Ross was saying in his letter, to really do anything you can to make sure whether that it's welcoming, whether it's signage or design cues or anything to really lead your view into the park. So just, again, reiterating his concerns about that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I have a clarification. The $14 million commitment by the applicant is for planning and construction, but not maintenance. So the costs of maintenance are borne by the applicant, but not part of that $14 million.
And that's for the life of the site plan, correct, Mr. Schultz?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, okay, the maintenance cost, yes. All right, thank you, Mr. Schultz, for that clarification. Anything else on this? All right, let us move to transportation. I have a couple questions, and then I know others do as well. Ms. Gabor, the applicant mentioned that they're going to have 2% of their parking spaces were going to be EV parking spaces. I didn't seem to see anywhere in the site plan conditions that specified that. If it is in there, would you mind pointing me to a specific site plan condition?
It is not in here. The EV parking is something that's not one of our standard conditions. On past projects, we have included it, but it is not a standard and it is not in this set of conditions.
So you have included it in previous ones. Can you enlighten us as to why it was not included here? Like what the rationale was for not doing that in this instance?
I think it was merely something that, since it's not something that was standard and it wasn't something that we focused our discussions on, it didn't make it in. I guess additionally, as part of the LEED discussion, it is something, when we talked about LEED, we were talking about the EV charging stations and with the electricity. So it's not something we did separately, but it is something that we feel that they are committed to and will be providing.
Yeah, I'll come to others in a second. For me, I think as we just had a new CEP, we're going to be seeing more EV parking. We're going to be seeing kind of more of an ask for this. I think this is an ask from the commission to staff to, as we go through kind of the updates that we're going to see about kind of the green building plan coming forward next year, I, for one, would be encouraging staff, as they're looking at updating the standard site plan conditions, to have this be something to be asking applicants, and not all applicants are going to do it. But I think it would be a touch point for us to then ask why they're not doing it. If it's not here, it's struck out or something like that, then at least be an opportunity for us to ask. So I appreciate the candor. Back to the applicant. I know you're committing to 2%. You're committing to a lot of energy improvements on this site. So I commend you for that. That being said, 2% EV is pretty low.
I would say that that's a minimum. What we'll do is take what we've learned from Seattle. When we first started building our buildings in Seattle and they opened in 2010, there weren't a lot of electrical vehicles and a lot of people, more hybrids than there were full electrical vehicles. We continue to add more and more. Our newer buildings now have many more charging stations than our original buildings had, and yet we go back and we add more because we do what our employees need and what they're looking for. So we just,
So back to Mr. Earle's point about the wiring for the kitchens. It is
future-proofed,
EV capable, it's EV ready, so that we can install them without spending 6 times the cost to come back and do it later?
Well, I believe the electrical source will be there in terms of the demand for the building. And then at Amazon's cost, we just go in and put in the charging stations for our employees.
Okay. I have another question on a different transportation matter, but there's more EV questions. I'll defer to colleagues. Go ahead.
An EV question. So I can't remember which of the SPRCs it was, but I believe I remember someone from either JBG or Amazon saying that the idea was similar to what the chair just asked about, the idea being that that the garage as designed could be efficiently converted to any higher share of EV parking. Is that, I guess maybe this is a question actually maybe for staff. Is there a standard by which we can say that the garage is EV ready? I think that's the term that you used.
So is
that a meaningful term?
Yes. So there's EV ready, there's EV capable, and there's actual EV spaces. And so there's kind of different. It's a continuum. So some of it is running conduit, some of it's having the plug. You have to have the available energy capacity on site, and then there's actually having charging stations. Right? It goes from kind of all the way up. And so
are these terms that the county is using as terms of art, or are they terms from industry that the county hasn't started adopting?
I'll turn to staff to answer the second question, but the first part of that is those are industry terms of EV capable, EV ready, and EVSE, which is electric vehicle supply equipment. So that's the kind of charging that you would need. So I'll turn to Ms. Gabor to answer your second question, Commissioner Weir.
I would concur with the chairman, which is there are industry standard definitions for those, but in terms of something, if you were thinking of potentially using in a site plan condition, I would be worried about doing that just to make sure that the clarity of what that means, that everyone understands what it is. I'm not sure if that's where you were going with this ultimately. So it's not something I would want to write a condition that said EV ready. But it is something that if we wanted to do something that said, like the EV spaces, that to me is something that we, I think we all understand what that means.
It's almost like we've had conversations like this before. Right? Thank you very much.
So Commissioner Siegel, then Commissioner Montelmi.
I wanted to raise the issue of, I think they're called LEVs. They're light electric vehicles. The Biro, I think, is a small electric car that's used in Europe. And I raise it because the 22202 community, the 3 civic associations, I think people are aware of this, created a livability action plan. And one point is to develop pilot programs to encourage innovation and experimentation. I think you're going down that road. I don't mean to suggest you're not. You aren't. But with this agenda item on transportation, as the community in 22202 thought about wider issues, we thought about how to knit the neighborhoods together better. And these light electric vehicles, I don't know that they're used in the United States, I don't think so, might really be something you might want to look into as an innovative pilot program. So I'm just sort of suggesting you give that some thought. And I see your heads nodding, so I'm delighted to see that. Thank you.
Jim?
I've actually raised the EV ready issue at other planning commission meetings, but I'm also the counter to that, wondering whether we really need even discuss it here in the sense that that might be something that's better left to the building codes when they're updated. What is appropriate for a garage, and as the applicant mentioned, it really ends up being, it's actually more than an employee amenity, it's an employee demand, and this is something that the marketplace is probably pretty easily going to be taken care of as the fleet shifts over to electric, which seems to be inevitable over the next 5-10 years, that it's not going to be a choice. Anybody who runs a garage, if they want somebody to park there, is going to have these things in place. And whether they want to take the risk of having to spend a huge amount of money to retrofit or get it ready right away is probably their choice rather than something we need to be concerned about. That's sort of the counter to my having even raised this in earlier ones. So like I said, I think it's not something we really need to worry about. It's clear that the applicant has it on their radar screen and is already dealing with it.
Thank you for that comment. And in fact, we did have this discussion at an SPRC prep meeting where we were assured that Amazon is on top of this and wants to meet the needs as they change, and they're committed to doing that. Is there more on transportation? Commissioner Steinberger.
Is this also the time to talk about parking?
Sure.
Great. Could the county staff please explain to me the difference between a wide compact space and a compact space?
A standard compact space per the zoning ordinance is 8 feet wide by 15 feet long, and a standard space is 8 feet 6 inches wide by 18 feet long. So a wide compact space is the standard width, so 8 feet 6 inches wide, but the compact length, which is 15 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Other transportation-related questions? Yes, Commissioner Morton.
As noted before, I had a question about micro-mobility. You've heard a lot about, oh, Amazon, you're a leader, you have a reputation for being an innovator, obviously a tech leader. And in terms of when we talk about next generation transportation, we've been talking about bike lanes and bike facilities. I'm just wondering, based on your future orientation or your experience in Seattle, do you have any strategy for encouraging or organizing or regulating other kinds of micromobility options, either within the park or at the curb? Just wonder if you could comment on that.
Certainly. Yeah, we're constantly trying new technologies in Seattle. A lot of our employees, we're at about a 11 block from one end of the campus to the other end of the campus. And employees use electric bikes. They have a lot of different companies in the Seattle area. We don't have electric scooters, thankfully, because we've seen other places where there have been lots of injuries, and we don't want our employees to get injured when they're going between buildings. We are also taking a look at autonomous vehicles, and those are also electric, and doing some test pilots in the area. So we're constantly looking at one of our leadership principles is to invent and simplify, and we're constantly looking at that throughout our ethos.
And do you have any ideas about applying that to this particular project?
We'll be doing the same thing here as well. When it's time to move people from one end to the other. But majority of the individuals will be able to walk between the buildings. This area, in terms of the transit, it's transit rich compared to what we have in Seattle, and we're very excited about it. That was one of the reasons that we selected Arlington.
All right. Any other questions on transportation? All right. I have two kind of unrelated things. So the first, the applicant mentioned on their slide 19 that the kind of pay structure for parking, it's going to be a monthly charge for parking. Is that correct? And then users will be kind of given back money essentially if they're using transit. Is essentially what's happening on a prorated basis. What's the rationale for not charging folks a daily rate instead of opting? Is it just ease of operation?
There's a variety of different ways that the people and employees can sign up for, depending upon what their needs are. A lot of people are able to come via transit or carpool. We also have Amazon Ride, which is a bus system that we go out into underserved areas where our metro doesn't really serve the population that well. And so we actually go out and pick people up and consolidate them to get them out of their cars. If you're a monthly parker, because people do live far away, they do pay. And our monthly rates in the Seattle area are in the $325 per month range. And employees pay a large share of that. Everyone is also given in Seattle, it's called an Orca Pass, so it's good on the Sounder train, which is a train system that runs between Tacoma and goes up north of us as well and comes into the Seattle area. Also on Metro buses, on Sound Transit, and also reimbursement for the ferry systems. In Seattle, we have roughly 44 buildings, about 12 million square feet, and about 55,000 employees. 20% of our employees currently walk to work. 17% live in the zip code. And of that, we have about 11,000 parking spaces. With 55,000 people, we have a lot more people that are having to get to work in other modes other than a single occupant vehicle. We also have the largest van pool ridership in all of King County, and we pay 100% of that cost for the employees as well as the parking. So we offer a variety of different modes for people to get to work. And the reimbursement for not coming using the car, because sometimes maybe someone has to pick up a child from childcare or has a doctor's appointment or something and they need their car during the day. We like to give them the flexibility and know that they are also rewarded for not driving on the days that they don't use their car.
I appreciate that detailed explanation. You just, think that requiring somebody to kind of make that daily choice and being charged each time is sort of a reminder of that. Would certainly kind of encourage you to rethink that. Obviously, your decision, but.
Well, if you have monthly parking, you get a fob, and so you get in and out. If you don't have one, you have to pull a ticket and you have to pay on the way out. So they are charged daily.
Yeah, so fair enough. I've made my point, and so obviously you disagree, and that's okay. But I've made my point. Ms. Gabor, I have a question about a condition on page 87. So it's 30E, top of page 87. The underlined portion there is modifying the kind of loading dock times for other deliveries can be modified by the zoning administrator, and it calls out things like baked goods or other perishable items. I hadn't really seen this site plan condition before and was wondering kind of the rationale for its inclusion here.
This is language we actually have used on previous site plans and use permits. We recently used this with the Westmont form-based code project, and then we used this on the Central District Retail, which was a JBG project that came forward October of last year. But anyways, with all that said,
good reminders. I appreciate that. That's good.
Yes, it's always nice to have condition language that has already been written, so we don't have to recreate the real. Yes, so I think what you're saying is actually exactly where we're going, which is because we realize there are some businesses that they do want to get their deliveries in the morning. If it's baked goods or it's fresh fruit or something, we don't want to penalize them, but it's not. But we still want to maintain the integrity of trying to limit those loading dock hours to the standard hours of 8 to 6.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate your clarification that this is not really that new in terms of language. Given that this would go to the zoning administrator, what kind of notification, and it's an administrative process, what goes to any of the kind of neighboring civic associations to notify them through a use permit or anything like that any of these loading hours would change from the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.?
Well, for admin changes in general, there is no notification to adjacent property owners.
All right, well, just notification to all you folks out there. It's certainly a possibility. Okay, is there anything else on transportation? All right, let's move on to kind of construction, phasing. The applicant did provide some, actually a fair amount of indication of where their laydown's going to be, where their phasing's going to be, but any further questions on that? Commissioner Latelmi.
this isn't so much construction as it's destruction. Those old warehouses there, can I assume that there will be maximum effort to recycle the demolished building?
Yes, that would be our intent, to recycle wherever possible in the demolition and construction process. It's actually a lead credit that we're targeting.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else on construction or phasing? All right, let's move on to community benefits. Commissioner Morton had one on, I think, public art, and then we'll go to Commissioner Steinberger.
Just quickly, I know you deal with the Public Art Commission or committee on this, and I would anticipate they'd say the same thing, but if you do an on-site project, I'd really encourage you. It's such a great opportunity to do something really extraordinary with an artist, and I'd encourage you, if you do on-site project, to consider the artist as a member of the design team from the very beginning. Not all architects like to work that way, but that really makes a much stronger public art project usually. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. I had a few items. I think they're all fairly quick to kind of run through. So with regards to the planned daycare, I understand and I saw kind of the condition on that is that, finding an operator for the daycare and all of that, that's sort of, a contingency. And I just wondered to what extent what the outreach process for that will kind of look like, and it might be too early to kind of have initiated some of those steps, but I think as we've heard from public speakers, from the planning commissioners, and just kind of generally throughout the entire process, a new daycare in this area will be a great benefit to the community and is something that I think has gone a long way to smoothing the entire process and kind of welcoming you all. So I want to make sure that that's something that we have a realistic plan to kind of make happen. So I wanted to hear a little more on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ware and then Commissioner Giacomini. Oh, you, sorry.
And that was a question.
Sorry.
And then I had a few other things.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Let me start by saying, yes, we have begun that engagement process. In fact, Matt's excited to talk about it. Matt, would you like to cover it? In fact, we've actually reached out to multiple daycare providers. JBG Smith has been a great partner in doing that, and have received some real enthusiasm from those providers for this space.
Following up on that, to what extent, as we go into the kind of the construction, the design, and then ultimately construction, to what extent are these kind of providers able to give you feedback on what would be kind of the most beneficial opportunities to kind of put into the space as it's going to be a daycare and functioning in that capacity?
So
hopefully for the long term.
Sure. We did this in Seattle, where one of our buildings, we decided early on that we wanted to have a daycare facility there. And we started to have conversations with daycare providers, and our architects got them involved early on to make sure that we met both for the state of Washington, state and county and city requirements. It's turned out to be a beautiful daycare facility, and it's open to everyone in the public. So it's not reserved for just Amazon employees. It's on a first-come, first-served basis, and that's exactly what we intend to do here as well.
And apologies if I'm not remembering this from the reading. What is the likely kind of capacity in terms of children that could be cared for in the daycare?
I think it's going to be roughly around 160 children.
Okay, thank you. And then I had one other question with regards that kind of falls into the amenity or kind of public benefits conversation. When it comes to kind of the use of the public meeting space, and we heard from some other members of the community, and I imagine that there's other folks on this commission who might feel similarly, though I don't pretend to speak for others, only myself. When it comes to the availability of using that public meeting space, I believe 4 times a year was kind of offered for county purposes. That does seem a little low to me, considering that is not all really that often, and I'm certain that there will be functions and things you have going on and kind of outside of work hours, but to the extent that my guess is that is also space that's not going to be occupied every evening, kind of on a general basis, it does seem like that's an opportunity for you to kind of work with the community to give back a bit more on that, whether it's, I think someone suggested once per month. Apologies, I no longer remember who said that. But I do think that is maybe a more realistic offer from you all to the community. Beyond that, even if you went in excess of that, even offering that at a, above and beyond, whether it's the 4 to 12, whatever kind of number of uses that, you find in the goodness of your heart to offer, even offering it beyond that number for a very low kind of rental fee, whether it's just kind of at cost for, electricity or whatever it might be to the building, I think that would go a long way, and kind of also opening it up to local community groups. The county does a lot. I mean, we spend most of our time here. That's not an exaggeration. But in terms of, one of the great things about Arlington is that we do have a very active and involved community, which will really benefit your company. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of different ways that people in this community give back to the community. And I think that by embracing that and kind of making the space something that is a real usable space for those in the community, you'll be getting back even more than you give in terms of people being involved in that investment in the community. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I comment on that, please? So the 4 times is a bare minimum. And in Seattle, our meeting center is used, probably 20, 30 times a year. And if it's available and it's not booked, we always say yes. There's never a charge either. We never charge for it. So there's no charge for the use of the space or the cleaning of the space or the security that we'll have to have there or anything like that. And we're more than happy to engage with the community. It's something that's available, and we'll let it be used every time we possibly can.
Thank you.
Thank you. And apologies, Commissioner Steinberger, for cutting you off. I saw Commissioner Weir's hand, and then I'll come to you, Commissioner McSweeney.
So I guess I might just be repeating the question, but I feel like I want a little bit more information on what the process for that discussion would be. I would want to see something reduced to print that talks about things like a schedule or how many times per period, like a year or a quarter or a month. Who has the right to ask for it? Is it the county that has a right to ask for it? Is it the civic associations working through the county? And this sounds like a statement. It's not, I promise. Well, it is, because I think that where that has to be written down is the site plan condition. But a question that, and maybe I'm just re-putting it back out there from what my colleague has asked, but what have the conversations been between staff and the applicant about how this is going to be communicated to the county and how our own expectations are going to be managed? And I'll give an example that a lot of people have a lot of angst about up here and elsewhere, in the form of the observation deck. I think that there are a lot of people in the county who are concerned that the fix is in, and we are no longer going to be able at some point in the near future to access the observation deck. And I think that there are a lot of people who are looking at the current usage and saying, we don't really know when we're going to have access to it, and for all we can tell, it looks like that information is being deliberately not provided. The observation deck is a site plan condition that is part of site plan mitigation, and we are already anxious about the loss of that public space. And at this point, we're sort of looking at this with even less of a commitment in the site plan conditions. And so, I'm gonna be moving some kind of recommendation, and I'd like that recommendation to be informed by the discussions that have been ongoing about what we can signal to the community.
So I can address that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, and then I'd also like to get Mr. Schreiber to talk to it too.
Yes.
So go ahead, Ms. Walsh.
The county attorney's office is working on a condition to memorialize the use of the event space by the county. As to the number of times per year, the intent on the 4 times per year was for really major events, filling the 700 seats. And as John Shuttler has mentioned, there will be many opportunities for the community to use the space on an availability basis for smaller events. But the intent for the 4 times a year, completely free of charge, all custodial, everything covered, was for actually major county events.
Thank you. Mr. Schreiber.
Sure. And so, again, I'm Aaron Schreiber with the Planning Division. And to just echo what Ms. Walsh mentioned, this is one of the conditions that is not included in your draft staff report because it's something that we continue to discuss with the applicant as well as with the county attorney's office. And to get to Mr. Weir's question, kind of what are the parameters of this? Where we're at right now is it is for a minimum, and we are looking at county-sponsored events. The space would be provided free of charge to those user groups. And the reason why we have it specified at a minimum of the 4 county-sponsored events, the county-sponsored is very important to us at this stage to not lose the opportunity for what could be a really exciting large venue. A 700-seat or capacity venue is not something that we would want to exhaust our allotment on some smaller event. So the discussion that we're moving into now, and it's something that we even discussed this morning, was exactly what Mr. Shuttler mentioned, is allowing for either this space or other spaces within the building to be made available to other smaller community-sponsored events. So that's something that we're looking to formalize in the condition as well. But from the benefits perspective, we were really focused on the large user group access here. Think of something, a hypothetical situation could be something like a high school graduation or a large art type of event, or just something that would really capitalize on that capacity rather than just necessarily something like an SPRC meeting. I'm sure that those opportunities will be available, but
You don't think we can get 700 people?
Be a really exciting project.
Commissioner Weir, any other questions before I go to other folks? Any other follow-up on this at the moment? All right, so I saw Commissioner McSweeney, Commissioner Giacomini, Commissioner Patel.
So I actually was going to ask the same thing about a site plan condition specifically for that. And I think, I guess the only comment I would make, I'm glad you all are talking about it. You're going to codify it. You're talking to the county attorney to put it into writing. I guess this might be something that, this might be an example of what the community is talking about when they say it would be great if during the SPRC process, we would know about these sorts of things. These sorts of things would be worked out by the time it comes to a public hearing like this. Related to that, a site plan condition, I was curious, I apologize, but I could not find a site plan condition about the new park, about Metropolitan Park. Is it here? I see all sorts of things. 21 is, landscape. But I didn't see a condition about the fact that Amazon is going to deliver and pay for a park to the tune of $14 million. It's in the report, but I don't see a site plan condition.
Yes, there are a number of conditions that are not included in your draft report. Some specific conditions are the one we just talked about was the use of the community event space. The park planning process is also not in there. That's something that we continue to negotiate. We did write about it in the draft report to explain to the community and this commission, what the intent is. And that is the condition language that we continue to discuss very closely with our county attorney and with the applicant and their representative. Again, I can explain to you the discussion point that we're at today. It is everything that Mr. Rivero mentioned earlier about the park planning process, about the time of period that it will take, the fact that the applicant is paying for the entire design process, how they will be coordinating with DPR to ensure that all materials are being approved by the county before they're presented to the community, coordinating invite lists, things of that nature, and then going all the way through the construction process and how that is at an amount of $14 million. We're also looking at some very specific language about how this design and construction process also includes the adjacent property owners, because remember, there is a part of their commitment which is reaching off-site, which is looking at not just rebuilding, but redesigning all of those open spaces already provided with the Met Park 1, 2, and 3 projects. So as Ms. Walsh mentioned earlier, I know that the applicant is engaged in a series of agreement discussions with those owners to allow for Amazon to move forward with the design and construction process. And so that's all being codified in this condition language, which will be part of the board's report. But there's absolutely the intent and the agreement there for them to do that. It's just the specific language wasn't ready in time for the distribution with this report.
Thank you for explaining that. Could I ask, are there other site plan conditions that are being worked on that are not here that we don't know about?
Yes, there are. The other conditions that are not included here, again, all of the intent of the language is explained in the staff report, but the specific language that is not included also includes a condition regarding the affordable housing contribution, which I believe is part of your discussion agenda tonight. And then I'll have to take a look. I'm just drawing a blank. I think those are really the major ones. The offsite transportation improvements, those are already included in the report. So you're really just looking at that community event space, the open space process, which also includes a component regarding the daycare element, because as we all know, with daycares, you have to have open space. We are very concerned that the open space, that if it's provided on the public portion of this new park, that it not be provided solely for the use of the daycare provider. So the applicant has already thought about that, and we're working on condition language that would allow for that to be located in an area of the private property to not take away from any of the park space. So that's another condition that we're still finalizing and hope to have that done, or we will have that done in time for the board's distribution.
So, Mr. Schreiber, thank you for that explanation. I'll come to you in a moment here, Ms. Giacomini. I know that the staff always kind of works up until the board meeting, and that's nothing new. That being, and I know that some of these things were discussed in the staff report. That being said, I think it's always good to have staff flag the things that you're continuing to work on. And so I would encourage you to take that back and make sure that for future site plans, we don't get to a situation where we're 2.5 hours into a discussion and we're kind of walking through the things that are still on staff's agenda, knowing that that's a typical thing, but I think it's good to flag them. Commissioner Giacomini, and then Commissioner Patel, and then Commissioner Steinberger.
Commissioner Steinberg, did you want to follow right on to this topic, or?
I did. No, I do. I think we both do.
Okay, I'm willing to yield because I have a different community benefit in mind. So.
Commissioner Steinberger, Commissioner Patel, and then Commissioner Steinberger.
I want to follow up with what Commissioner Weir was teasing out with regard to the community space. I understand that the county attorney is negotiating with the applicant around the 4 uses and what that looks like, that is one issue. When you are trying to tease out the language or the condition language regarding this meeting space, is that including the community use and what the meaning of community use is?
I think that what we heard are some commitments by the applicant tonight, and we will take that feedback as well as anything else that this commission provides, and we will look at how we weave that into the conditions as we move forward with the recommendation ultimately to the county board.
For me, I think that I would want to know what the definition of community ultimately is with regard to this space, especially given the size of this space and the opportunities it could provide to the larger community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger.
So what I actually wanted to follow on with was with regards to the site plan conditions that are not quite ready for prime time yet. And I have some significant concerns. I haven't been on planning commission that long, so I don't know what's normal kind of process in terms of what's in the report or not in the report. It is somewhere in between frightening and discouraging to find out that things that are sort of major elements to what the community is expecting and we're expecting to see in the report are not in the report, and that those things were not highlighted for us. It makes me wonder if this presentation is actually ready for Planning Commission to vote on. And I understand that this is still being worked on and that these conditions will be ready for County Board. At least I think I understand that. I'm still a little unclear if that's actually the commitment that's being made. And that's concerning. So I don't really understand sort of, I don't exactly know how to react to that. And although I haven't been on the commission for that long, the idea that I'm at a loss for words is unusual. So I really kind of don't know what to say to that, and I'm just, I'm not sure how, as a body, we move forward with that when there's large items here that are meant to be a commitment that just aren't in this. So I'm going to struggle with that and try to come up with an amendment that makes sense for how we address that, because I will struggle to vote for this as it is written. Thank you.
Mr. Schreiber?
Sure. So what you have in front of you is a draft report. So the fact that not all of the conditions are finalized is not something that's atypical. What we wrote in the report was explaining every intention and every piece of the community benefits proposal that is in front of you. Just the specific language in terms of how that's going to actually be implemented for the zoning administrator to ensure that it's being done is what you don't see. But everything regarding the community use of the space, to the park planning process, to every other aspect of the report that explains how they're earning the additional density or how they're even mitigating just a site plan in and of itself, is something that, you know, the majority of that is in the conditions. We will continue to tweak the conditions as we move forward to the board. And then ultimately, the board will have the final set of conditions as recommended by staff, and then it's up to them to approve. But everything, as I mentioned, we would not have written it that way if we didn't already have the discussions in place to codify that in a condition, which we felt comfortable making to the board. It just wasn't in its final form yet and ready for public distribution.
I promised Commissioner Giacomini, and then I'll come to you, Commissioner Siegel.
This is on this subject, but I would certainly yield to Commissioner Giacomini.
If you can go quickly, Commissioner Siegel, and then
very quickly.
We'll go to Commissioner.
Just to respond, I'm comfortable with Commissioner Schroll's suggestion that if there are conditions still being looked at, worked on, and for which language is being developed, it would just be good to get a listing of what those are so that we don't waste time on attempting to give you language which will be refined anyway. So that would be the only motion that I would sign on to. And I only, just to add, this has come up before. Sometimes it's problematic. In this case, I don't see it as being problematic. Sometimes it is.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. All right, Commissioner Giacomini.
I'm not exactly sure that this falls under community benefits, but since we're talking about community, I think it has been raised by the civic associations. And given, again, that we are dealing with a building that's being built by and will be occupied by the known entity, I'm not sure it needs to be a condition, but I'm hopeful that the good work that the applicant has been doing with the community could be codified in some way, that there will be a person identified that the neighborhood will always have, that will be able to talk not just about construction issues as they're going on, but later about the community space, about other asks, about the trash isn't being picked up. Anything and everything would be really, really helpful for the building. And I don't know if we need to put that into a condition for the site plan. Since it still seems to be open, maybe we can do that if the applicant is willing. I didn't know if you wish to comment.
We have many teams at Amazon, and when the building is up, and so first of all, Joe Chapman is here in the audience tonight, and he is the director of real estate facilities for HQ2 in Arlington. He was hired and joined us in July of this year. He, like myself in Seattle, And now I've turned it over to another individual who's the Director of Real Estate Facilities in the Seattle and Bellevue area. They're kind of the main point people for everything that the community needs. And then they have teams, and in Seattle we have an events team. And a lot of times, I'll get a email from the head of the American Heart Association, or from this Downtown Seattle Association, or the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, because I'm involved in those. There'll be many other, like the University of Washington and their Board of Regents. They'll reach out and they'll say, can we use your event space? And we're thinking about this date. I'll forward the email on to Ben Grace on our events team, and Ben then takes it from there, and they make all the arrangements and help with setting them up with caterers and the setup that they need and the breakdown and all the things that, and AV equipment, you name it. So it's very informal. We walk our talk and we just do what we say we're going to do. But if you need to have things that are more prescribed, we can certainly work with Aaron and his team to do that.
Great. I think I wasn't thinking so much about the space and the use of it, because I think that's going to be handled in one. I'm thinking more in the situation where somebody in the neighborhood wants to say, we would like to be able to meet, and we have 15 people, do you have space? Or, by the way, the exterior light on the third level of your building seems to have tilted and it's now in my bedroom window. It's those little things. Who is the person and what number? Is there a building contact? So he or she could then disseminate it to the various teams. I think that's what people will want. It's going to be a different entity. It's going to be bigger. There's lots of moving parts with it, and I think there'll be a lot more people who will want to communicate with you on a range of issues than we see in other buildings. So if you all would want to think about that, it might be helpful.
We'll take that. Duly noted. Thank you.
And Ms. Giacomini, I think you're probably familiar. We have done this before, and I know that Ms. Walsh probably remembers. We had a similar issue arise with the Virginia Hospital Center project. And
yes,
there was
I remember that well.
There was a discussion about having a community liaison, and so I think that we can continue discussions with the applicant and take lessons learned and come up with some agreeable form that would help the community stay involved with them.
Thank you. The scar has healed. I feel better about it.
Commissioner Peterson.
I have a question for staff, or a point that I'd like to make just about community mitigants. And I know during one of the last hearings, I brought up the point about how high-rise residential buildings are impacting schools, and how are those being considered when we're talking about community mitigants and community benefits. And so for this particular project, I could see public safety being influenced or impacted, since they have a goal of getting to any site in Arlington within 4 minutes. And so if we've got these additional high rises that are being built, maybe we need additional fire stations. And so I want you guys to think creatively about how we're going to start considering the impact on Arlington County's budget when we're talking about these projects. I know you said there are limitations on what we can ask for with community benefits, but it would be interesting to know that we do see with these additional buildings, there will be extra costs, which we should be thinking about when we're reviewing a project. Thank you.
Sure, and we involve our public safety partners in our public facility review processes. And so as they do their projections on, capacity needs and how they expand, they are looking at development patterns. And so we're pretty well coordinated with them on those matters, but also in terms of just a project like this, the fire marshal is a regular team member during the review process. So the fire marshal has reviewed this project, as he does all projects, to provide input upon, which has helped influence the design of this project, looking at the travel access routes, the locations of fire hydrants, fire control rooms, things of that nature. So that is always something that is considered for how these projects are built and how they'll be serviced. And then they consider these as they look at their growth projections as well.
All right. Yes, Commissioner Morton.
I was going to ask a question about retail. Does this make sense now?
Sure, yes.
Okay, since we're talking about site plan conditions, this seems like a really unusual and really positive situation. You've expressed your desire and your practice in the past of trying to, as as I said before, curate the retail, offer as an amenity, maybe some subsidized rents. At the same time, there's some concern in the local community about small business displacement. You've seen some of the community groups worried about the viability of retail. Will there be vacancies? I know it's difficult to put in language that's really freezing a market situation. There's inherent volatility in market changes, but is your approach codified some way in Seattle, or is it possible to I know that you're saying that that's what you're going to do, and I believe you, but is there some way of formalizing that?
In Seattle, nothing is codified like that. There's a requirement that there be retail at the base of the building, and in my opinion, it's not a very successful project if the retail is vacant. So we do everything we possibly can to fill it up, and I know that our employees prefer to have local, very eclectic and unique and diverse tenant mix. We don't have a lot of national retail brands or chains there. In some cases, we work with each one individually, or not in some cases, in all cases, we work with them individually, and we work with them on their rent structure and their tenant improvements. We're not a typical developer. We're not looking for a return. We're not in doing this to make money. We're looking at it to make a community. And it's important, especially if our cafeterias within the building are designed to only feed a third of the population that we put in a particular building. We need those retail establishments to be there, and we need them to be there on from day one. When the buildings first open, our goal is to have the retail fully occupied and operational. So that's just been our practice. And all of our retail spaces in Seattle are full. If it's a building that we don't own and operate, we can't control the retail there, but when we do own and operate it, we can.
All right, thank you. Anything else on retail? Retail equivalents? All right, let's, I think Commissioner Peterson had a question about the easements under the streets. Mr. Schultz, about for Met 1 or Ms. Gabor, for Met Parks 1, 2, and 3.
Can you please specify what was, or just specify what was the exact question?
Do you want to rephrase your question about
Well,
the
it was
easements?
just that the entire report was saying you're kind of approving and you agree and you're recommending that we approve this, but then there was the one sentence that you do not support the dedication of the streets that have any portion of garage underneath to be consistent with current practice. So I didn't know if you were saying like this is a caveat to an otherwise approved plan, or if I was misreading it.
So when Met Park 1, 2, and 3 were approved, they were, can you pull up the slide? So when Met Park 1, 2, and 3 were approved, there was a part of the conditions, the very last sentence said essentially that when the last building in the last phase came before us for their CO for tenant occupancy, that all of the streets need to be dedicated to the county. And portions of this site for Met Park 1, 2, and 3 do have garages underneath the streets. And it's not something that we want to have the streets dedicated to us if there is garage underneath it. So I'm thinking maybe I just wasn't clear in my sentences, which is essentially because the way the conditions were originally written for Met Park 1, 2, and 3, it would require those owners to dedicate the streets to us, and we do not want them, to be pretty blunt about it.
Okay.
So there are two portions that do not have garage under it, and those portions are shown here in blue. So it's a portion of 13th Street and then a portion of South Elm Street. And those are the only portions we would want. I will add that we are still continuing to discuss with the owners of Met Park 1, 2, and 3 about whether or not they even want to dedicate it to us. So it's something that, depending on how those discussions go, and before we get to the board, we will make a decision. So it may end up being that we're just going to strike the language altogether, and those streets will not be dedicated to us.
And Ms. Gabor, you don't want them dedicated to the county because of maintenance and things of that nature, correct?
That is correct. With the garage under it, it just ends up being additional maintenance burden, and the county does not want to incur that.
All right, anything further, Commissioner Okay. So we also had some kind of process questions from folks on the SPRC process, future planning. Any other questions from commissioners here? Commissioner Siegel and then Commissioner McSweeney.
I would just make a comment on the SPRC process, and I think Mr. Devanzo mentioned that you can't do everything in 3 SPRCs. We've had a lot of experience. When we did Penn Place, we had 23 SPRCs, as I recall, and of course that will be changing, and that was neither efficient nor was there real quality there for a lot of different reasons. So I think it's not so much the number of SPRCs that we have. I do think 1 SPRC is totally insufficient because people do need to go back and think about what they've heard and come back and report. So a minimum of 2, in my view, is important. What I think staff has encouraged us to do in the last year or so is try to be more efficient with 3 SPRCs. We have gone to 4, we have gone to 5 when the community needs it. And this commission has the ability and the authority to ask for more SPRCs as long as it's clear to us that there are issues that need further discussion. The other thing I want to say about that is what I feel is missing is, I think was also pointed out by a community member, some sort of pre-SPRC information. What I would like to hear about are prior discussions with an applicant, either a concept review, conceptual review, which has been recently formalized by the county. Even, in my view, even if the county has said this project hasn't measured up, does not comport well enough with existing plans and policies. And then we know the evolution of a proposal. That I felt is very, very good information. It gives you much more color, the character of the negotiation, the character of the developer, and we can start thinking ahead so that you don't get to the final SPRC and bring up a big issue that is just a non-starter because you've gone too far down the road. So I know we've asked that before, and I want to press that point. Finally, I just want to say, I think we can do a lot of these SPRC reviews in 3 or 4 meetings. I think we can, but I think we can improve the quality of the SPRC with some prior information. So that's what I want to say about the SPRC process that was raised by a community member.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Thank you. You know, I think we're trying to walk a fine line here. With the SPRC process, we obviously want to have a fair and public hearing. We want to understand what the applicant is bringing forward. We want to raise any issues with the applicant so that they're fully aware of them and can mitigate them as part of the process. But I think there's also a public transparency that is part of this process as well. So I've been on the commission for 4 years, and I actually don't remember, and I could have a faulty memory, I don't remember a report coming to us with so many things still being negotiated. And we have recently had more and more things being negotiated after the final SPRC. And I think that is a problem, I think, if we are trying to have a transparent process with the community. I think that presents an issue. So I just want to say that. And we might need to think about maybe not holding the third SPRC so quickly. Maybe there are some other things that the county and the developer can work out between SPRC number 2 and 3. I know there have been recent projects where we've made that recommendation and it has not been taken. So I guess I would just stress again that perhaps we need to push a little harder as a commission if we feel that the process is not transparent enough or we're not resolving issues by the time we finish the third SPRC.
Thank you. Others? Discussion on any other issues? Oh.
I had one, I'm sorry. I have another. Well, we had a question on here that I think we skipped, and I was interested in hearing the answer to it. It's under the construction, and it's a question about construction employees. Are you intending to hire union workers? Are they going to be paid a living wage? And will there be efforts to outreach to qualified MBE, WBE local firms? I'm interested in the answer.
So while not part of our site plan application, this is a very important issue to Amazon. We've taken steps to ensure that the highest labor standards and to support a well-compensated, highly qualified, and diverse construction workforce is in place. We are contractually requiring our general contractors, subcontractors, and tiered subcontractors on the Met Park development to pay all non-salaried workers Davis-Bacon wages and fringe benefits. This will establish a minimum wage standard for the project. Independent 1099 contractors will not be allowed unless approved by the owner. We will provide notice to the Baltimore, D.C. building trade unions of all subcontractor packages when we are going out to bid. We hired SkillSmart, a third-party labor administration team, to oversee the implementation, monitoring, and reporting of Amazon's labor standards and compliance. The team's responsibilities include an online data management and compliance portal, real-time payroll and issue monitoring, job site visitations, investigation, and audit procedures to be a resource for our construction workforce if issues arise. The online compliance platform will also allow us to track and promote workforce participation for diverse workers and businesses in the local market. We are coordinating with our general contractors to identify various skills needed on our Arlington headquarter project. This information will be useful to help guide the activities of our workforce and training partners throughout the region as they create and expand career pathways into the construction trades for Arlington headquarters and other projects throughout the region.
Thank you. That was a really great answer. I would just ask, you mentioned online monitoring.
Yes.
That you have a platform. Is some of that information going to be publicly available so you know how well you did in getting union workers?
We're going to be giving reports on a quarterly basis to the county so that they actually see it'll be part of the reports that we provide to the county commissioner and the county manager.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Siegel.
I have two issues. One, very quickly on affordable housing. I had read recently that the county board last month approved what I would call what looks like a rent stabilization program of $500,000. Because there's anxiety in the community that's been expressed, can staff tell us a little more about how that might work, or is it premature for you to do so?
I don't think it would be appropriate for the planning staff to comment on that. I think it's probably something more appropriate for the housing division staff who are not here tonight to come back and brief the commission if that's something that's requested.
But you can confirm that the board did approve that sum for some sort of assistance to renters. That's true.
I'm not familiar with that particular piece, but I know it's a component of our ongoing efforts with the Housing Arlington initiative. So.
Okay. I did have one more thing about process since I raised that. I did want to make the point that we're doing this backwards, given Arlington County's normal process. Normally, we would have a plan, a station area plan, small area plan, sector plan. What's happened is that Amazon chose to come. The market delivered us a gift, a resource, and I'm not complaining that it's backwards. Usually, we would do a plan and then have an SPRC proposal to measure up against the plan. We don't have that. I know that there are plans, a larger planning process, two of them, afoot, and I really wanted to give Mr. Duffy a chance to fill in some of the blanks, because some of the anxiety expressed by the community does have to do with how do we accommodate this much more density, even though we have a great mitigation package.
Thank you, Commissioner, and for the record, Robert Duffy, Planning Director. A couple of great questions. And first, we do have a plan. And if you'll recall, when we began the process that led to the LRPC and SPRC meetings, staff, Mr. Matuzik, and as well as Mr. Fuzzarelli presented you the Pentagon City Phase Development Site Plan and the Crystal City Sector Plan. We understand the relationship between those two planning efforts. You heard the architect tonight talk about meshing those together, and you heard the Business Improvement District staff talk about the importance of that relationship. We understand that. But there is a plan for Pentagon City, and it's, as you know, it's a plan that's been in place since '76 and updated many times. And if you recall, the staff presented to you that process and how we went through it, the decisions were made. And in terms of the integrity of the plan, one of the measures that I think is important, I think the planning staff believes is important, is that how much growth do we anticipate, even back in '76, which is really difficult to do. But back then, we used floor area ratio for the entire area as a measure, and I believe it was about 2.5. And even with the developments occurred today and being considered this evening, we're still below that. And that's a major factor for looking at capacity. So we do have a plan. But with that, you'll remember in April, when we came to you in the county board, the work session, we knew it was time to reopen that phase development site plan at Pentagon City. We were getting close to build out, and some of the major blocks within and adjoining the PDSP need to be reconsidered because of the many needs, the many planning and design issues that we think are so important. And we've been asked to proceed with that. We are very close to completing a draft of the work program, and we want to come back to the Planning Commission early next year and certainly to the community and talk about that process and the importance of that. So we'll be back to give you an update on that. And again, we're committed to it, and it's been first and foremost in your planning staff's mind and work program well before this process started.
Quickly.
Just a quick follow-up. I didn't mean to imply that there was absolutely no plan. Just the Crystal City Sector Plan is far more articulated. I think that's kind of what I meant.
It's very different. You're correct. And as you can see, I think Peter's presentation tonight, as well as the presentation staff gave you, as we move from a fairly broad urban renewal planning regime back in the 70s, 80s, and maybe early 90s, to a more finer grain understanding of urban form, urban design. That's where we need to go with this next planning effort. And I think many of the livability principles that the community has worked on will certainly be part of that process as well.
And finally, I think the community did raise some issues tonight, a request really for a deeper discussion in some forum. I think the CRC, of which I'm a member, has in fact provided a lot of good information. It is focused on Crystal City, so I suggest, and I'll just lay this out make a suggestion to you that it be revised. You could call it National Landing. You could think of another name, so that the charge and the scope of what's discussed there matches what we're seeing on the ground.
As you know, we will provide you with a pretty extensive approach to how we'll engage, and I think we've listened carefully to some of the testimony tonight. We'll continue to meet with the Planning Commission and certainly the community, and when we come forward early next year with every aspect of the scope and work program, we'll be able to address that completely. So more to come on that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Morton, I would like to try to get to motions within the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, given the hour, but Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. We haven't talked much about affordable housing, but piggybacking on Commissioner Siegel, I was happy to see the livability principles talk a lot about affordability as a primary concern. I know it's of concern to us here up on the dais. And I'm sort of sympathetic to this idea. The 20 million, it just sounds huge and fantastic, but I think we're all a little bit confused about, compared to what. So I don't know, in the future going forward, we've had some discussions about, can we sort of track different kinds of projects? What do we expect from affordable housing? This seems really extraordinary and positive, but I think we're all a little bit confused about, how that number. Also, how quickly can this be allocated to mitigate the impacts that are happening right now? How soon can some of this funding get allocated? And also, as the livability principles and the community have pointed out, is there a way to target efforts to retain residents or the elderly, or what kind of plans might there be or options do we have to really try to deal right now with the impacts that the community is already facing?
So on this number, I would start by saying I think it is an extraordinary number. I think it is a significant commitment towards achieving the goals of the Affordable Housing Master Plan. I can let you know that this is the largest single monetary contribution that we've received from a site plan project. I would also remind you that this is an office building. This is not a residential building that has the ability to, provide affordable housing units on site or in the vicinity. So the $20 million number is a combination of what the zoning ordinance requires on the base amount, so that's $7.5 million. And then the remaining $12.5 million is an amount that we negotiated. And it's a number that we were able to arrive at in very specific conversations with the applicant. The way that we're finalizing the condition language regarding this is there are two options. One, it would be a $20 million contribution that would be contributed to the county in our typical fashion with a project like this through various permit processes. So, prior to issuance of permit X, they provide us an amount. We've broken that up into 3 payments. But then we also have an option B, which we find to be even equally as exciting as the size of this contribution, but focusing on having that money come in a single contribution in order to fund an identified project in the vicinity of this site. And that really, to us, provides a significant value in a way to offset the impact that this project may be perceived to have on affordable housing within the area. So the problem is you'd have to identify a site, but we just want to be able to directly use that money for a project rather than necessarily seeing it go solely to AHIF and then have to be distributed through our normal process, which is a NOFA process or some other type of funding round. We wanted to have the ability to call on that money and use it immediately. And I would also remind you that, as was mentioned earlier by the applicant, they are looking at a fairly aggressive construction schedule in order to get to their butts and seats status that they speak of often. So that means those monies would come in very soon. And so we would have that well in advance of the final certificate of occupancy for the buildings. But that's how we're looking at it in the final stages of this, of kind of having an A and a B scenario. but it is structured around the $20 million number, and I don't think that we should take lightly the large contribution that we were able to arrive at on this project.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, the A and B scenario, you would decide A or B by the time it goes to the county board, or the county board will be presented with, there's two possible scenarios, A and B?
The condition is being crafted right now to have both in play, and then for the county to make an election in terms of, whether we're able to move forward with, if we have an actual project identified, prior to the time that they start construction. But that would be the scenario where we could, let's say we had an opportunity, we had a project in the air, we had a site to acquire, we had something that could either support the creation or the preservation of affordable housing, then we would like to be able to, at the county's election, to call that money in sooner to move forward with a very specific project.
All right, thank you. Any other topics that weren't covered, people wanted to discuss? All right, I think we're ready for motions. We'll start with the MTP motion. Commissioner Lantelmi.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board adopt the resolution contained in the Planning Commission's December 2nd, 2019 Agenda Item 1A as Attachment 1 to approve an amendment of the Master Transportation Plan map to remove a section of 14th Road South east of South Elm Street.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Giacomini. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Commissioner Gearin.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached ordinance for a phased development site plan amendment, site plan number 105, to the Pentagon City Phased Development Site Plan to revise condition number 2 and 54 to convert the remaining allocation of residential dwelling units for parcel 3 of the PDSP to office and commercial gross floor area and to permit 2 office buildings of 22 stories in height each for the parcels of real property known as 1201-1429 South Fern Street, 1232-1450 South Ead Street, 520 12th Street South, and 501 and 525 15th Street South. RPC number 35-003-001 through -008, and 015 through 021, and 023, and 834 through 840, subject to all previously approved conditions and the amended conditions of the attached ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Siegel. Is there any discussion or amendment? All right, hearing none, the question comes on that motion. All in favor, please raise your hand. Again, appears to be unanimous. Ms. Badger, you have everybody? Okay. Commissioner Gearin.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached ordinance to approve an amendment to Site Plan Number 105, SP-9 for Metropolitan Park Phases 6, 7, and 8 to construct 2 22-story office buildings of approximately 2.152 million square feet of gross floor area, including ground floor retail and retail equivalent uses, with a shared underground parking garage and modifications of use regulations, including required parking, additional density, exclusions from gross floor area, penthouse height, and other use modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan located at 1232-1450 South Ead Street and 501 and 525 15th Street South, RPC number 35-003-001 and -002, 015 through 021, and 023, subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Commissioner Gearin.
I propose an amendment.
You're so recognized.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board include a site plan condition that codifies the Met Park planning process, including the developer contribution of at least $14 million for planning and construction and park construction concurrent with office building construction and park maintenance in perpetuity.
Is there a second? It was seconded by Commissioner Weir.
Give it to.
All right, we'll give it to Commissioner Patel. Commissioner Gearin, do you want to speak to your motion?
I think we've spoken to this.
Fair enough. Ms. Badger, do you have? No?
I can give it to you.
Okay. Can you please read it again for folks?
Oh, yes. I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board include a site plan condition that codifies the Met Park planning process, including developer contribution of at least $14 million for planning and construction and park construction concurrent with office building construction and park maintenance in perpetuity.
Okay, so it's moved and seconded by Commissioner Patel. Any discussion? Commissioner Steinberger, and then, yes. Commissioner Peters.
One question or clarification to that. My understanding from the conversation here tonight, is that park maintenance going forward was not included in the 14 million, so that should be excluded from that, and in addition to?
The way I wrote it, I had colons, construction colon, and office building construction colon, and so that the 14 million didn't refer to the maintenance in perpetuity.
Can you read it again?
Yes, indeed, and help me if it's not clear to you.
Okay.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board include a site plan condition that codifies the Met Park planning process, including developer contribution of at least $14 million for planning and construction, colon, and park construction concurrent with office building construction, colon, and park maintenance in perpetuity. Does that work?
Okay. Maybe.
Semicolon, sorry.
Okay, I'm just wondering if maybe it would be clearer to me, and if no one else is confused, I will live with it, if we said funds for park maintenance in perpetuity? No, not necessary? No one's concerned? Okay, I'll live with it.
Okay, Commissioner Peterson, did you have a question? Same. Commissioner McSweeney.
While I agree with your motion, I feel that there are other things that are being negotiated that are not encompassed in the motion, but I do not purport to know what they all are. Therefore, I will be voting against. I don't feel that I have enough information, and nothing against the project. I think it's a good project, but I don't feel I can cast a vote for in good conscience.
Okay, Commissioner Steinberger, and then Commissioner Siegel.
Can I amend the amendment? Should I not do that? Should I wait for this to be handled?
You can certainly, yeah, you certainly can if you would like.
Okay. The amendment that I would like to add is one that is more global in nature in terms of the fact that I do recognize the staff put a lot of effort into the report to sort of convey what the overall site plan conditions are going to be and what and I do believe that the project is going to live up to those ultimately. I understand that there may be other amendments coming forth that sort of pick out some of the individual items we've addressed. I would be more comfortable having global language as well that says that the site plan conditions as put forth will reflect in an exactitude what the staff has presented in their report. Sure. And if we can't get that, then I think I'm with Commissioner McSweeney.
Okay,
I'd like to make a motion.
Well,
I want to handle these.
Yeah, hold on a sec. So I will get to you all. So right now, we are considering Commissioner Guerin's motion.
That would be a substitute.
And so what you are considering is it's a different motion and not a motion to amend this one. So you can either offer it as a substitute, which would essentially, if it became the main motion, would take the place of Commissioner Guerin's motion, or we can dispose of Commissioner Guerin's motion either by adopting or not adopting that motion, and then we can consider your motion as a standalone later. So those are your options at the moment. So, and I guess you could amend the motion before us if you would like to do that. So you can either offer it as a substitute, or you can offer your motion later, or you can try to amend the motion before us.
I'm getting advice from council.
One council getting advice from another council. Okay. Commissioner Siegel.
What I would like to, what I think I would like to do is add on to the amendment that Commissioner Guerin has made to the language that I'm proposing, which encompasses the global. I thought council said I could do that.
You can do it, but
condition.
Yes, that's it.
So
all right. So you have to move it as a motion, right? So
I move
there you go.
that the language from the staff report, which includes site plan conditions which have not yet been memorialized as site plan conditions at this time be committed to as site plan conditions going forward and will be part of the project.
So could the language be, I'm sorry.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Is there a second for what Commissioner Steinberger just moved?
Could we second it with some revisions to that language so it feels a little bit more comfortable for people?
Why, if it, look, Commissioner, if it's not seconded, it fails for the lack of a second.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner- Yes, Commissioner Weir.
I would suggest that, Commissioner Steinberger, since you've been thinking along this line, I would suggest that the best way to handle your motion is as a discrete motion. Given that we've got this one before us, we've got another one that pertains to conditions that are being worked out, at least one. But I think that that your point that you're trying to address is a more global point. And I think that point to the county board and to the county staff would best be made as a standalone point.
I appreciate
Take that or leave it. Yeah, but
I would concur with Commissioner Weir on that point. Commissioner Siegel, and then go back to you, Commissioner Patel.
Just, you may have said this before to questions to staff, but are you working on language that would include a $14 million price tag that was included in the staff report? Are you working on this language now?
Yes, we are.
You are. Therefore, I agree with Commissioner McSweeney. I'm really uncomfortable pulling legal language out of the air, although I do think I agree with Commissioner Weir that I'm very uncomfortable that we don't have a list of those conditions that are still are undergoing discussion.
I'm going to go to Commissioner Weir. I'm going to come back to Commissioner Gearin, and then we're going to vote on this matter.
Commissioner McSweeney, it's rare that I disagree with you on the dais, but in this case, I think it's important that that this commission signal what it thinks the outcome should be. And since we are advisory, the county board is entirely within its rights and discretion to take those parameters that we think should be included in the final negotiated outcome and take some of them and leave some of them. So I think from the perspective that we're signaling what we think should be thought through, I intend to support it, to support the motion.
Okay.
Since I was addressed, may I?
I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. I apologize for
All
that.
right, we're going to go to, we're on Commissioner Gearin's motion. Commissioner McSweeney, you can, and then we're going to have Commissioner Gearin wrap up, and then we'll vote.
Thank you. Commissioner Weir, of course, you're welcome to disagree with me. I'm not doing this lightly. I am making a point. I do, in general, support the project, and I'm sure the minutes will read that way, that I am actually making a different point in my vote against.
Okay, Commissioner
Thank
Gearin.
you.
Thank you. I agree with the comments made by my colleagues that this does feel as though we should have had a little more information about draft site plan conditions prior to a full evaluation, but we don't. And we did get a good discussion from staff that they are indeed working on these. So my intent with this language is to support the work that staff is doing on this so that when it goes to the board, they know that we are also in agreement with going forward and being a little more precise with our site plan conditions on this, and I believe coming forward some other areas for amended language.
All right, all those in favor of Commissioner Gearin's motion, please raise your hand. Do you have that? All right, all opposed? Any abstentions? One abstention. All right, the motion carries. Other amendments? Commissioner Weir.
Okay, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board, and Ms. Badger, I'll send this to you momentarily. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board add a site plan condition that memorializes the parameters of public access to the meeting space either directly or by incorporating an agreement between the county and the applicant, semicolon. The condition should confirm the number of annual county uses and annual community uses, as well as communicate to the public what access the public will have to utilize the meeting space under what conditions and parameters, how access will be scheduled and coordinated, whether the meeting space will be available for election polling, and how the public might utilize the meeting space for smaller events that do not require the whole space.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Steinberger. We heard some discussion on this, but you want to speak to your motion quickly?
We've
Commissioner Weir?
spoken to it.
That was quick. All right.
Very
any-
quick.
Yes.
Thank you for the
Commissioner
polling language. Appreciate that.
Other discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Commissioner Patel. Can you please turn on your mic, please? Thank you.
Commissioner Weir has used, but I would move to recommend to county staff that the county board, that the planning commission, excuse me, my counsel is now giving me language. That the planning commission recommends that the county board add a site plan condition that memorializes the language or the intent of the staff with regard to affordable housing, off-site transportation, daycare, and open space requirements set forth in its December 2nd staff report.
I would second that.
Seconded by Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Patel, do you want to speak to your motion?
I think it's been spoken to.
Okay. Any further discussion or amendment?
Sorry, so we're just saying that there are stats.
Commissioner Peterson, you got to speak into your microphone.
Just to confirm, it's saying that there are specific numbers in the staff report that aren't in the site plan, and you want them in the site plan.
Specific conditions that were outlined by staff in regard to the conditions that have not been specifically addressed. And I just jotted down the ones that had not been specifically formalized, that there's continued negotiations. So I'd like to move to have those recommendations.
Yep.
Okay, Commissioner Steinberger.
I appreciate that motion. I think it gets at what I was trying to address clumsily before. My concern is still that I don't necessarily think that that's an all-encompassing list of the items still outstanding. I'm still somewhat inclined to support the motion. I struggle with sort of not knowing what's still to be determined.
Sure. So I certainly empathize with that that feeling, and this is something that often happens with site plans, as Mr. Schreiber noted, that they do come to us and some stage of incompletedness. And so, while this feels really sometimes maybe more incomplete than normal, this is not. This is a normal thing. We do see this quite often. So, I think as Commissioner Weir noted, I think some of your anxiety, Commissioner Steinberger, may be more appropriate for an emotion afterward about how site plans come to us and in what stage, because I think your anxiety is more about that, and I would encourage you, if you still feel that way, to do that then. But I think, as other commissioners have noted, I think we are raising the issue with the board. And even if we might have left one or two things out, I think the point has been made to staff and to the board about what we're after, which is things becoming more complete as they reach the board. And I know staff has heard that, and I'm sure the board will when they read our letter in this. Yes, Commissioner Weir, and then Commissioner Siegel. Yes.
I just want to observe that, while I agree with you that this is something that happens, this has approached, and I understand the timelines. I'm not trying to be critical of staff. I'm trying to observe our perspective of the situation. This is something where the number of these kinds of things and the magnitude of them has approached a difference of kind rather than a difference of degree. And I suspect, Commissioner Steinberger, that is part of what's animating your frustration. You know, we don't usually, it's very common that we're told the park planning process is underway. It's very common that we're told the parameters of the affordable housing commission of the affordable housing issues are being worked out, et cetera, et cetera. It's not very common that we're told the county attorney is presently memorializing an agreement, negotiating with the applicant an agreement about the kinds of contours of who's going to get to use, about big deal things like what's the access to the meeting space going to be, such that we don't have anything in print in the site, in the conditions at all, right? I'm not, again, I'm trying, and maybe failing, but I'm trying not to appear like I'm picking a fight with either the staff here or their bosses. But I do want to say that, Commissioner Steinberger, I think you're latching on. I think there's something there. I think this has been a different process.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
So I don't want us to get into a lot of back and forth on this. We've had a fair amount of discussion.
I have a question for Stan.
I will recognize you, Commissioner Siegel, but I do want to, we've had a fair amount of discussion on this already, and if people want to make motions at the appropriate time, that's fine. Go ahead, Commissioner Siegel.
So here's my question for staff. I thought what I was hearing you say was that in the staff report, you have actually indicated all of the issues, the intent for the various issues that have not been fully codified in the conditions. Can you tell us whether there are any other issues that were not recorded or discussed in staff report that might end up as a condition?
At the current time, there are not, but I can't say what's going to come out of your discussion tonight, if you're going to pass any more motions, or if something else comes up, in the next week. But again, as is typical, a project like this continues to evolve up until the board meeting. So we will continue to coordinate and address those issues as those arise. But the main things that we are working on are all of those things that are explained in the staff report that aren't codified in the conditions yet, those being the open space process, the affordable housing contribution, and then the access to the conference space.
Just real quick, I'm going to support Commissioner Patel's motion. It's just about intent. It's not full of, it doesn't pretend to be legal language, which is worked out with the county attorney. We don't have access to that. But I don't think it limits, as you were saying, we've asked to be more informed about what's ongoing. And so I would support the motion.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McSweeney, and then I'll give Commissioner Patel the last word if she wants it on her motion.
Thank you. My understanding is the site plan conditions are enforceable. The report is not. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and the board ultimately approves the conditions. And then it is up to the zoning administrator to approve to enforce what is ultimately approved.
Okay. Commissioner Patel, any last words on your motion?
Just to go to Commissioner McSweeney's last comment, my motion would attempt to memorialize the intended conditions that are currently being negotiated as set forth in that report. So it aims to get to this global place that Commissioner Steinberger would like to get to, and allows it to be broad enough to allow us to look into the report and make sure that anything other than the affordable housing, off-site transportation, daycare, and open space are also included, including but not limited to those issues.
Great, thank you. All right, all in favor of Commissioner Patel's motion, please raise your hand. All opposed? All right, abstentions? Commissioner Morton? All right, that passes. Any further amendment? Commissioner Ware?
Ms. Badger, I'll send this to you also again. If it gets changed, that's the version that I'll send you. So I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board add a site plan condition requiring at least 10% of on-site parking spaces be considered EV-ready, consistent with the industry-accepted meaning of the term EV-ready. Such spaces shall be designed and constructed to include a fully wired circuit, including conduit, wiring, and electrical service capacity sufficient to power or allow for future installation of electric vehicle supply equipment, parentheses EVSE.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Giacomini. Commissioner Weir, do you want to speak to your motion?
I will speak to this briefly. I fully encourage, while I fully encourage and hope that the applicant adds a 0 to that 10%, the basis that I'm drawing from here is an ordinance that I'm certain that the applicant is familiar with because I'm drawing on Seattle's recently adopted EV-ready ordinance, which for non-residential uses requires 10%, and then specifies in the ordinance in a little bit more technical detail what it is to mean that a site be EV-ready. I would hope that the county would move towards something along the lines that Seattle and other communities have adopted, and I take the applicant at its good faith word that they aim to do much better than 10%. But in making a recommendation about what the floor should be, I think it's good to look at precedent that other local governments have adopted, and I think in this case, the Seattle case is particularly apt.
All right, Commissioner Lentami.
I probably won't be voting for this for the reasons I talked about earlier. I've come around to think differently about EV-ready, and I think that this is something that the marketplace will be dealing with quite efficiently, given the direction that the fleet is going, that anybody building a new building now is probably putting that in anyway, or at least thinking about having things be easily retrofitted for when the time comes, and that this is something that really is more of a building code issue rather than something that we need to prescribe.
Others, people want us to be heard on this matter. Commissioner Patel.
I just wanted to note that I will likely abstain from this vote simply because I don't feel like we had sufficient conversation on this particular point. And as we're talking about industry standards and what other localities, I don't feel like I have sufficient information on what we as a community or a county look like versus others. And this particular term, as you, Chairman Schroll, and Commissioner Weir were attempting to tease out earlier in the conversation. So for those reasons, I'll be abstaining from this vote.
Thank you, Commissioner Patel. Others? All right, then the question comes on the motion by Commissioner Weir. All of those in favor? All those opposed? Those abstaining? I think that motion fails. Any other motions? Did you get that? Ms. Badger, did you get did that a little quickly. Any other motions? All right, then the question comes on the motion as amended. All those in favor? We've disposed of all the motions?
The main motion.
The main motion. The main motion is amended. Yeah, or the main motion. No, it's number 2 on our list that we've been amending. And so the question now comes on the main motion as amended. No, we didn't. No, we did not. So it's the main motion. It's number 2 on your sheet as amended. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, any abstentions? I don't believe so. Okay, Commissioner Gearin.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached ordinance to approve an amendment to Site Plan Number 105, SP-9, to approve a site plan amendment to Site Plan 105, SP-109. Did I type that twice? Okay, let me correct my own language here.
That's correct, Commissioner Gearin.
I was correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So continuing with the second SP number 105, SP-9 to Metropolitan Park Phases 1, 2, and 3 to eliminate the requirement to convey certain streets to the county in fee simple located at 1201-1429 South Fern Street, RPC number 35-003-003 through -008 and 834 through 839, subject to all previous conditions and the amended conditions in the attached ordinance.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Giacomini. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Appears to be unanimous. Any further amendment? Okay. Yes, Commissioner, go ahead.
I want to thank everyone who participated in this SPRC process, my PC colleagues and my co-chair Daniel, for the thoughtful discussions regarding the merits of the proposal and the opportunities and constraints. I want to acknowledge the frustration on the part of the PC that we received what felt like an incomplete site plan conditions, and while we've tried to address some of these with our amendments, also the magnitude of the site mitigations is very, very large for this project. And we don't usually get the sort of things that we got here. So this is new. And, but I want to make sure that the concerns we've had with receiving something that didn't really feel ready have been heard. I also want to thank the other SPRC members, many who have left tonight, and the representatives from the 3 civic associations all working together and the larger community. They identified ways that this proposed development could be modified to better address the needs and a vision for the community, and they also began to articulate the larger issues outside of the direct scope of this SPRC, but of great interest to all of us who work and volunteer to support our community. I want to thank staff, the excellent shepherding of this project from Peter Schultz, and Matt Matusik, and Joanne Gabor, and Marco Rivero, and others, and of course our PC clerk, Giselle Johnson, who managed all of those meetings for us. Definitely want to thank the applicant development team. This SPRC went very, very well. You were very responsive to the community. You had extra meetings outside of the SPRC, and you shared with and learned from the community and the local knowledge that they brought to the table and shaped the project in ways where we saw changes from one SPRC meeting to the next. And we did get remarkable site mitigations from this. For my newer colleagues to PC and for the neighbors who don't participate in SPRCs outside of their community, we don't always see this full collaboration with the applicant developer in our community. It's very heartening, especially given well, we expect to see a lot of development in the community, and we've heard the concerns of the neighbors down there. But I feel, and I think I speak for the SPRC as a whole, that this went very, very well. And I want to hope that this is precedential, and that as we go forward, we continue to see very collaborative and progressive SPRCs, and that we look forward to continuing to work with you to shape our community.
Thank you, Commissioner Guerin, for those concluding thoughts, and thanks to all the participants. Thanks for everybody for being here tonight, and with that, we stand in recess until Wednesday.